Chapter 177. This voice was indifferent, but very sharp. It sounded like a female voice at first, but it was slightly different from a female voice. Xia Lianying's brow imperceptibly furrowed. The white-haired bandit leader was the patriarch of the Guangzhou Chen family, Chen Tuanyun. The Chen family was a rising star of Guangzhou and had fought with the Xie family in business. It was not surprising that they would do something like this. If the Xie family could not resolve this matter, the Xie family would suffer great losses in the future. But Chen Tuanyun was famed for his filial piety, and he had a son at an old age. In his mind, his mother and the only son of the Chen family were likely more important than his own life. Now that he had decided to switch, who in the Chen family could raise objections? Chen Tuanyun abruptly turned around. The person who had spoken was not far behind him, riding a gray horse. Their clothing was also gray, and their figure was small. Their face was covered with a yellow cloth, and it was impossible to tell if they were male or female. "I want to try." Looking at Chen Tuanyun, who had turned to look at him, this person spoke again in an even sharper voice. Chen Tuanyun's hands trembled slightly. His face was as pale as paper. He begged in an almost inaudible voice, "Official, you are a small family. How can you compare to the country? Also, I may not fail and may not harm your family at all." The gray-robed person's gaze was gentle, but his tone was indescribably determined and gave off an irresistible presence. Chen Tuanyun's chest rose and fell violently. He wanted to say something, but the gray-robed person's gaze suddenly turned harsh. He said in a cold voice, "Official Chen, do not forget your identity. Do not forget you are not from the Qin." Chen Tuanyun's chest felt like it had been hit by a hammer. He gritted his teeth and turned around. Xia Lianying had not spoken until Chen Tuanyun turned around. He looked deeply at Chen Tuanyun and said, emphasizing each word, "You should have heard of me. What I, Xia Lianying, hate the most is people going back on their word when doing business." Just as his voice rang out, two short and rapid whistles suddenly appeared in the air. Two sword lights, one red and one blue, suddenly appeared in the two carriages with the curtains raised and passed through the old woman and the child. Blood spurted out as two pieces of flesh separated from the old woman's and the child's bodies, flying out of the carriage. The old woman and the child's bodies trembled violently, as if they were using all their strength to howl miserably, but for some reason they couldn't make any sound. This silent scene was even more frightening. "Xia Lianying!" Chen Tuanyun immediately roared like an injured beast, his expression uglier than if he were crying. "Isn't that a little inappropriate?" Fusu's face was also very pale. Although he could not see the scene in the carriage, he could guess what had happened. "It's not good, but it's not what the Xie family expected." Ding Ning's expression was cold. His gaze remained on the gray-robed person with a sharp voice behind Chen Tuanyun. "If I am not wrong, the only person who can force the patriarch of the Chen family to change his mind is a powerful cultivator above Realm 7. This Realm 7 cultivator must have confirmed that there were no Realm 7s in the Xie family caravan. So he stopped the Chen family from switching. He either wants to use lightning to assassinate Xia Lianying, or he wants to use some method to steal the hostages of the Chen family. Xia Lianying is not as mediocre as the rumors say. He should have seen clearly now. If he cannot exert enough pressure on the other, then all of the Xie family members may die here. Ding Ning's voice grew colder. Also, the other does not want to obtain great benefits from the Xie family, but wants to kill all of the Xie family members here. Kill all of the Xie family members here. Fu Su's expression was shocked. The Xie family is the wealthiest in Guangzhou and one of the pillars of the Qin dynasty. They just robbed some of the Xie family members in exchange for astounding wealth and will not disturb the imperial palace. But If these people of the Xie family are killed, it will cause a great commotion. Chongling will use all of its power to investigate. The Chun family disguised as bandits cannot hide. Why are they doing this? Ding Ning sneered and said, maybe from the start, their goal was to get rid of this pillar or to disrupt what the Xie family is doing right now. Hearing this, Fu Su suddenly thought of a possibility, and his heart shook. At the same time, he grew even more nervous. If it was as Ding Ning said, that cultivator with the shrill voice was a Realm 7 existence, then Xie Lianing, Xie Ro, and the others were in great danger. While Chun Tuanyun was screaming and talking to Ding Ning, Xie Lianing's expression was cold. He looked coldly at Chun Tuanyun and said, I do not know what your intentions are, and I do not care what grandmasters are among you. But I can guarantee that my 2 attendants will not be stingy with their lives. No matter how fast the person behind you is, before they or I fall, the heads of your mother and your precious son will fall from their bodies. I will not give you any chance to choose. Xie Lianing paused and looked expressionlessly at the bandits surrounding the dozen Xie family members behind Chen Tuanyun. He said coldly, if you do not release them in 3 breaths, what will fall from their bodies will not be a piece of flesh, but an arm. No, Chun Tuanyun's entire body was soaked in sweat, as if he had just been fished out of the water. He looked absent-mindedly at the 2 bleeding figures in the carriage. His right hand left the reins and lifted upwards. At this time, the thin, gray-robed person not far behind him narrowed his eyes. A thin but exceptionally sharp aura was quickly released from his body. Chun Tuanyun's body was still trying to raise his right arm. However, his right arm could not be raised because his entire right arm was separated from his shoulder and fell to the ground. Chun Tuanyun had reacted when the gray-robed person's presence was released, but he was unable to stop the other from cutting off his arm. The moment his right arm was cut off, he finally counterattacked. A cry of despair came out of his mouth. A rainbow-like brilliance surged out of his left hand, slashing toward the gray-robed man behind him at an astonishing speed. There were still 2 horse gang members between him and the gray-robed man. However, these 2 horse gang members were not even touched by this rainbow-like brilliance. They let out shrill cries and flew backwards with the sound of countless bones breaking. This rainbow light gave off the unique presence of a life bond item, but seemed to be stronger than ordinary life bond items. There seemed to be stars flashing in the gray-robed person's eyes. This rainbow light was astoundingly fast, but in his eyes, it seemed to be very slow. When the 2 horse gang members in front of him were sent flying backward with their bones broken, he just stretched out his right hand unhurriedly. He wore a silver metal ring on his right thumb. When he reached out his hand, it was as if there was an endless mountain falling from the sky, instantly condensing into his silver metal ring. Streams of silver energy flowed out of the small seal scripts on the metal ring and covered his hand. His hand seemed to be covered in heavy mercury, and then spread along his arm towards his body. There were no fancy movements. He used this silver hand to grab the rainbow-like brilliance that was coming towards him. The moment the silver palm and the rainbow light made contact, countless dazzling lights flashed through the gaps between the palm and the fingers. Terrifying forces were about to explode along with these lights, but in the next extremely small instant, these forces seemed to sink into water and penetrated into the viscous silver streams of energy. At this time, the silver plating had just covered half of this gray-robed person's body. Without any clear sound, countless slurry lines suddenly shot out from the edges of the silver plating, as if countless silver flowers suddenly bloomed on the other half of his body. At the same time, Chun Tuanyun's pupils contracted violently. With a muffled sound, his entire body seemed to have been crushed by an invisible giant. A cloud of blood mist sprayed out from his mouth. his entire body flew backward softly, giving people the feeling that he was a weightless catkin floating in the air. The rainbow light was firmly locked in place by the silver palm. The light quickly dimmed, revealing its true appearance. It was a 7-colored curved jade in the shape of a bull's horn. Ding Ning had been looking at the silver thumb ring and the rainbow brilliance. He had already figured out what these two items were, but he kept silent and didn't say anything. It is the silver Rakshasa ring and the worry-free horn. Fu Su's expression grew ugly. He said coldly, "They are from the Chu dynasty." The Chu dynasty was the best in forging, and the strongest seal weapons in the cultivation world all came from the Chu. The worry-free horn came from the Chu dynasty's worry-free palace, and had disappeared from the Chu for many years. It was possible that it had ended up in another country, but the silver Rakshasa ring was the treasure of the Chu Silver Thread Workshop. The Silver Thread Workshop was called a workshop, but in reality, it was one of the top 10 cultivation places of the Chu dynasty. A secret treasure of a sect like this naturally could not end up in the hands of a cultivator from another dynasty. As a Chu person, you do not deserve to use the worry-free horn. This gray-robed cultivator did not seem to want to disguise his identity. Looking at Chun Tuanyun, who was no longer breathing in the air, he coldly shook his head and said, Chapter 178. The Chun family has had a foothold in Guangzhou since the last generation. I want to know why he is from the Chu. Xia Lianying looked at Chun Tuanyun, who had fallen to the ground and died. He asked in a sympathetic tone. The gray-robed cultivator said coolly, "The son is the son, but the mother is not the mother." Xia Lianying was slightly surprised and said, "Adopted?" The gray-robed cultivator did not refuse to answer his question and said coldly, "A Chu orphan was adopted by a kind mother in Guangzhou. She treats him as her own and naturally is grateful." Xia Lianying said disdainfully, "I think that the Chu orphan was able to enter the Chun family through your arrangements." The gray-robed cultivator raised an eyebrow. For him, this matter did not need to be explained. Xia Lianying sneered and said, "Everyone knows gratitude, much less the kind mother who raised them. It is normal for Chun Tuanyun to be filial to his mother. Even if you have ulterior motives, you can wait until he exchanges hostages. If you fail this time, next time you will speak of righteousness, but in reality, you are just afraid that after he releases the hostages, we will flee. You will not be able to kill all of us and expose your scheme. You killed Chun Tuanyun for quick success. You are not even a grandmaster. You are worse than a dog." The gray-robed cultivator was not angry and said disdainfully, "Our failure is because we underestimated you and the Xie family's abilities. You are much stronger than others' judgment of you." The gray-robed cultivator looked up slightly and swept his cold gaze across everyone in the surroundings. In the end, his gaze landed on Xia Lianying. "But do not think about using words to cause internal strife among the people around me. You should know that since I have shown my strength, the people around me know that if anyone wants to attack me, they will immediately die." Xia Lianying did not speak and narrowed his eyes slightly. While he was fat, he was like a tiger that had just woken up. "I will not kill those people. They will stay here. I think that you will not leave them behind and run." The gray-robed cultivator turned slightly and pointed at the dozen or so members of the Xie family who were surrounded in the distance. Then his figure moved slightly, and he floated down from his horse. He began to walk slowly towards the Xie family's convoy. At the same time, he looked at Xia Lianying and Xie Ro and said calmly, "Although I had no choice but to kill Chun Tuanyun, it has become extremely simple now. Either your Xie family has enough strength to kill me, or you will be killed by me." Hearing these words, Xie Ro's heart was filled with an unknown emotion. She unconsciously turned her head to look at the 3 black carriages behind her. Ding Ning suddenly became nervous. His gaze was locked onto Xie Lianying and Xie Ro. This small movement caused him to realize that while the Xie family had prepared in order to make the Chun family lower their guard, the Xie family most likely did not send anyone above Realm 7. The Xie family most likely had not expected such a powerful cultivator from the Chu dynasty among these disguised bandits. In other words, the Xie family may not have the ability to match this Chu dynasty cultivator. Forefather Zhou should be a powerful enemy of this Chu dynasty cultivator. He should want to use this opportunity to form a relationship with the Xie family. But this Chu dynasty cultivator had expressed his desire to try. This meant that this Chu cultivator may have the ability to instantly assassinate an opponent from a great distance. If so, then even Forefather Zhou may not be able to make it in time. Also, he was almost certain that Forefather Zhou would not act quickly. Forefather Zhou may not be able to escape unscathed against a cultivator like this. Even if Forefather Zhou could defeat this Chu cultivator without being wounded with his understanding of Forefather Zhou, he would not act before the Xie family used all their power. He would wait until the Xie family was in dire straits and the situation was extremely dangerous before he acted. Even if he was not wounded, he would pretend to be seriously wounded when fighting this Chu dynasty cultivator. This way, the Xie family would feel that they owed him more favors. Ding Ning was even certain that he would only act after Xie Lianying died. Xie Lianying had already shown great adaptability and judgment that outsiders could not imagine. Compared to Xie Lianying, someone as inexperienced as Xie Ro was easier to deceive and control. When Xie Ro turned to look at the 3 black carriages Ding Ning was in, the gray-robed cultivator of the Chu dynasty also glanced at the 3 black carriages in the distance. These 3 black carriages that had been following the Xie family caravan naturally entered his sight. But when he saw Xie Ro look back, but the 3 black carriages did not move, the wariness in his eyes faded slightly. A wave of vital energy silently flowed down his feet. In the world of cultivators, life and death were only separated by a moment. Fu Su's breathing grew faster. He sensed that the carriages in front and behind him had not moved. He could not help but open his mouth, wanting to make a sound. Ding Ning's eyes flashed. He had decided what he was going to do. The moment Fu Su opened his mouth, he shouted urgently at Fu Su, "Do not act rashly." Fu Su stilled. He did not understand why Ding Ning would shout like this. Even if he did not want to have any conflict with Xie Ro, did he not even care about Xie Ro's life? However, just as he was startled, he suddenly felt an erupting volcano beside him. With a boom, his eardrums rang. Before he could react, the vital energy in Ding Ning's body surged wildly. Ding Ning's body turned into a gust of wind as he surged out of the carriage. 2 sharp sounds tore through the air at the same time. 2 streaks of black sword light flew out from his fingertips, cutting through the harness on one of the horses pulling their carriage. Without the slightest hesitation, the tip of his foot tapped on the back of this horse. This horse cried out in pain, madly galloping forward with him. This series of actions flowed smoothly. By the time Fu Su understood that Ding Ning had only shouted for him to not move, the horse had already charged dozens of feet away with Ding Ning. The black carriage immediately tilted when one of the 2 horses pulling the carriage was lost. The Zhou family carriage driver at the front was an extraordinary cultivator. His figure was still steady, nailed to the front of the carriage like a nail. Yet even he was unable to stop Ding Ning in time. He could only shout. What does he want to do? Fu Su looked at Ding Ning, who was charging towards the Xie family caravan. He could not understand what Ding Ning wanted to do. In his view, with Ding Ning's strength, charging like this was suicide. In the middle carriage, Forefather Zhou's expression suddenly darkened. He raised his hands slightly, and two terrifying auras seemed to be about to seep out from his arms. However, his eyes flashed, and he seemed to have thought of something. He only smiled coldly and placed his hands on his knees without saying a word. Since he did not speak, the three black carriages naturally did not move. Xia Rou looked in shock at Ding Ning, who was charging over on his horse. She could not understand why Ding Ning was charging over alone, or what effect he could have. Yet looking at Ding Ning's calm but burning eyes from a distance, the sound of hooves was like countless small hammers hitting her body. The gray-robed cultivator's figure stilled slightly. He had already attacked, but the two strange black sword lights when Ding Ning charged out of the carriage puzzled him. So he stopped. Ding Ning was not an ordinary cultivator. He was certain where the gray-robed cultivator's hesitation came from. Therefore, he immediately raised his hand. With a swoosh, another beam of black sword light shot out toward the sky in front of him. Ahead of him was the Xie family caravan and the gray-robed cultivator. Countless possibilities flashed through the gray-robed cultivator's mind when a black sword light tore through the air from such a distance. The names of countless powerful methods and sword manuals appeared in his mind. He could not help but look up, narrowing his eyes at this black sword light that seemed to melt under the sunlight. He feared some astounding change would occur to this black sword light. Yet as this black sword light came closer, he sensed that the power of this black sword light grew smaller, and it flew slower. Then he sensed a strong presence of annihilation and coldness. Starfiend gathering method. He could not help but murmur to himself. His brow unconsciously furrowed. He was certain what kind of method this was, and that Ding Ning's cultivation was very weak compared to him. However, he felt vaguely uneasy. This young man who was galloping over on his horse seemed to be able to see through his thoughts and control the rhythm of this battle. Of course, he did not want anyone to control the rhythm of the battle. So he took a deep breath and stopped hesitating. Two streams of vital energy flowed into his feet. There were two light blue jade pieces in the soles of his shoes. These two light green jade pieces were so thin that they were completely transparent. They were not even as thick as a strand of hair. It was unknown what kind of method was used to cut and polish them. However, on such a thin jade surface, there were countless fine runes. Following the infusion of his two true essences, with a puff, two green pillars of light suddenly surged out from under his feet. His body disappeared in these two blue pillars of light. He truly disappeared, because at this moment his figure did not exist in the vision of the surrounding people at all. Chapter 179. Flee. Ding Ning only shouted one word, because he only had time to shout one word. With this word, all the condensed fiendish sword chi accumulated in his body shot out from between his fingers. Streaks of black sword light instantly turned into a torrential rain, all striking towards a spot beside Xie Lianying's body. Whether it was his shout or the storm formed by the black sword lights, it was irresistible to Xie Lianying and Xie Rou. Let's go. A sharp light flashed in Xie Lianying's eyes. He pulled Xie Rou, who was beside him, back almost instinctively. A soft sound of surprise sounded. A faint indigo light suddenly appeared in the storm formed by the black sword lights. A silver flow appeared out of nowhere. Xie Rou's heart almost stopped as she retreated. While every cultivator knew that the Chu dynasty was the best in the world in terms of seal weapons, she had never heard of this gray-robed cultivator coming through the air like this. A silver flow first appeared clearly in the air, and then a gray figure. For this powerful cultivator of the Chu dynasty, The storm formed by Ding Ning forcing out all the fiendish swords in his body seemed light. The gray figure only turned slightly. Half of his body flashed with silver light and straightened like a large silver sword. Streaks of black sword light exploded on the silver light, and black flowers bloomed in the air. The other half of this Chu dynasty cultivator's body also bloomed with silver flowers, but he only felt that half of his body was slightly cold. The difference between Realm 3 and Realm 7 was too great. Also, he had a seal weapon formed from the efforts of countless Chu cultivators and craftsmen. While this Chu dynasty cultivator could not understand how Ding Ning could sense his location, his gaze was still indifferent. He used normal speed to channel his vital energy into the worry-free horn in his hand. A wave of killing intent appeared in the air again. It was only because the heaven-earth yuan qi emitted from the worry-free horn was too colorful and bright that the killing intent gave people a carefree and bright feeling. It was easy for people to forget many sorrowful things and even slow down their reactions. The Xie family was the wealthiest in Guangzhou, and the cultivators they brought were not ordinary people. The worry-free horn in this Chu dynasty cultivator's hand passed through the fragments of the fiendish swords and charged towards Xie Lianing, who was retreating. The two flying swords floating next to the old woman and child finally made the correct response. There was a loud bang. The red sword burned fiercely, giving off blinding light. While the sword was small because of the power it gave off, it felt like an enormous ball of lava was erupting from the mouth of a volcano and smashing towards this Chu dynasty cultivator. The other indigo sword silently flew down and sank into the earth below. Even its presence became the same as the earth. This Chu dynasty cultivator frowned slightly, but the worry-free horn in his hand did not change at all. With a muffled clang, the oncoming red sword was forced to stop in the air by the powerful force. It couldn't even dodge, and was sent flying backwards by the powerful force. All the flames that flowed out of the runes on the sword dissipated and fell into the surrounding grass. In an instant, the moisture in the grass was dried up and turned into dry grass. Then it was set ablaze. This Chu dynasty cultivator did not worry about where the sinister indigo sword went. For him, the indigo sword that had sunk into the earth would eventually come out of the earth and stab towards his body. If this small sword came out of the earth, he would be able to sense it and react in time. This was the absolute confidence that only cultivators above Realm 7 could have. The moment the small red sword was sent flying backwards, one of the Xie family carriages suddenly shook. With a muffled grunt, the carriage curtains flew outwards, and some bloody foam sprayed out. But to this Chu dynasty cultivator's surprise, the indigo sword that had sunk into the earth seemed to have disappeared and did not appear. Because of his absolute confidence, this Chu dynasty cultivator did not slow down in his movements. Two surges of primal qi of heaven and earth surged out from under his feet. Two visible balls of light appeared under his feet. In the next moment, his entire body was thrown forward, and he continued to accelerate crazily. In half a breath, the worry-free horn in his hand gave off sharp murderousness and approached the retreating Xie Lianing and Xie Ro. An old shout came from the carriage behind Xie Lianing and Xie Ro. Inside the carriage sat an old scholar with white hair and a beard. As he shouted, his body seemed to be filled with countless holes, shooting out countless green gusts of wind. The hardwood carriage around him crumbled like a paper lantern, scattering outwards. The indigo wind beams twisted like they were alive and swept towards this Chu dynasty cultivator from all directions like the tales of fairies. This Chu dynasty cultivator had a disdainful expression. His body did not change, but his vital energy surged out more violently. The rainbow energy from the worry-free horn in his hand grew stronger. It did not seem to touch Xie Lianing and Xie Ro, but Xie Lianing and Xie Ro both grunted, and blood seeped out of the corners of their mouths. The old scholar's expression did not change, but his body seemed to be weightless. He floated up with the indigo wind beams and blocked in front of Xie Lianing and Xie Ro. The Chu cultivator's eyes suddenly focused. He suddenly sensed that there was a strange aura in these green gusts of wind. His body suddenly froze. From the beginning until now, there was finally a pause in his body. The pause was because of the eruption of even stronger energy. Primal energies of the universe gathered like mountains above his head and flooded into his silver Rakshasa thumb ring at an unimaginable speed for ordinary cultivators. The thick mercury-like energy that flowed out of the silver Rakshasa thumb ring immediately covered his entire body. Even his orifices were filled with silver energy, and he turned into a silver person. Almost all the indigo wind beams collapsed when they hit his body, but one indigo wind beam did not dissipate and gave off more and more of the light of crystal. The Chu cultivator sneered in disdain. Countless cracks quickly appeared on the green wind that had just bound his body and contracted violently. Inside the cracks, the layers of the chips could be clearly seen. The old scholar's body was still floating in the air, but his insides were shaking violently. Bright red blood gathered chaotic energy and sprayed out of his mouth and nose. A powerful presence unique to a life bond item came out of the crystal-like indigo wind beam. So this was not a wind beam made from primal energies of the universe, but the life bond item he cultivated. Life bond items were called life bond items because they had an inexplicable connection to the cultivator's life. If their life bond item was destroyed, they would be seriously injured at best and die at worst. Yet, this old scholar's life bond item was about to be destroyed, but he did not hesitate and squeezed out all the power he could control from his body without reservation. The cracked indigo life bond item was locked in a stalemate. At this time, in the last carriage, a young indigo-robed swordsman with determined eyes took a deep breath. The indigo flying sword he had hidden underground for a long time finally silently came out of the earth under the Chu cultivator's feet. The silver light on the Chu cultivator's face faded slightly. The yellow cloth covering his face fell off due to the rippling of energy. Behind the yellow scarf was a thin, fair feminine face that looked a little like a woman's. A hint of disdain and pity flashed across his face. Other than that woman from the Zhongshan family, the Xie family is only so strong. When he said this, the worry-free horn in his hand had already been pulled back. It stuck close to his body and swept down from top to bottom. The rainbow-like light slid down onto the green crystal bundles binding his body. The green crystal bundles shattered into countless pieces, and the old scholar floating in the air fell to the ground, silently dying. He stepped forward. The rainbow-like light in his hand continued to fall and sweep under his feet. The end of the light accurately hit the indigo flying sword that had just come out of the earth. It seemed like a gentle exchange, but it was like two small mountains crashing into each other. There was an explosion. The indigo sword, no more than a foot long, plowed a deep trench in the ground like it was plowing the ground. The young indigo-robed swordsman, sitting in the last carriage, bowed his head in dejection. Countless blade-like wrinkles appeared on his smooth face, and blood flowed out of each wrinkle. The Chu cultivator proudly raised his head. In his view, no one in the Xie family could stop him from killing Xie Lianing and Xie Ro, and even the youth near Xie Lianing and Xie Ro. But at this time, he sensed an impossible surge of primal energies of the universe. He suddenly turned around, his eyes flashing with shock and disbelief. Chapter 180. His shock did not come from the power of the primal energies of the universe, but from the direction of the primal energies of the universe. The primal energies of the universe that suddenly appeared came from the carriage where the bleeding old woman was. There was only the old woman who had been cut in the carriage. In his perception, no one in the Xie family caravan could stop him from killing Xie Lianying and Xie Ro. Yet, to his surprise, this bleeding old woman was attacking him. The moment he turned around, the silver Rakshasa thumb ring on his hand once again sent out large amounts of mercury-like energy that covered his entire body. The old woman, who had lost a large chunk of flesh on her shoulder, half of her body dyed in blood, looked extremely miserable. However, right now, her expression was completely calm. Her palms were extended outwards. The carriage curtains in front of her, including half of the carriage, were already smashed to pieces by the abundant power. Many earthen yellow stars of light strangely and quickly appeared in the earth in front of her, forming two paths of light in front of her palms. These two earthen yellow paths of light were like extensions of her palms. With an unstoppable presence, they pressed hard on the Chu cultivator's body the moment he turned around. The Chu cultivator's silver brow furrowed deeply. With a low shout, the silver energy covering his body flew up like waves. His figure staggered slightly, the ground beneath his feet caving in, but his movements didn't slow down at all. The worry-free horn in his hand flew out like a flying sword, also sweeping towards the old woman's body at this time. With a soft pop, half of the old woman's body shattered, turning into bloody paste that flew backwards. However, at this moment, another strange aura appeared in the air. This aura came from the child, who also had blood flowing from his body. Because of the great loss of blood, this child's face was extremely pale, but his eyes were as black as ink, forming a strong contrast. The old woman was killed in one blow, half of her body turned to bloody paste, but his seemingly childish and pale face was extremely calm. A spinning black gold cone-shaped sword flew out of his blood-soaked sleeve and attacked the Chu cultivator's abdomen with astounding speed. The great Chu cultivator grunted as blood seeped out of his mouth and nose. The silver yuan qi on his body was almost completely dispersed. There were sounds of ripping and bones breaking where the dark, gold cone-shaped small sword had struck. His body could no longer maintain its momentum. 3 balls of air waves splashed up from the ground, and his body was instantly pushed back by more than 30 meters. The small conical sword sank several inches into his flesh. The silver energy on his body disappeared. But in this moment, a surge of vital energy came out of his body and flooded into the silver Rakshasa ring on his hand. Mercury-like energy covered his hand. His hand came down and gripped the violently spinning black gold cone-shaped small sword. There was a muffled buzzing sound in the air, and a mist of blood gushed out from his waist. All of the consciousness and energy in the seal scripts of this black gold cone-shaped sword were forced out by him. In an instant, it became a dead object that had lost its vitality. The child slumped back against the carriage. The Chu cultivator coldly threw out the small sword. The small sword created a wild gust of wind and landed on the child's chest. The child's chest caved in. Flesh and blood flew out, and the caved-in area quickly turned into a transparent hole. The wooden planks of the carriage behind the young boy had been completely crushed by the powerful force. His organs had all disappeared, and he was about to die. However, in the moment before he died, he turned his head to look behind him. On his calm and cold face, there was a smile that said he had fulfilled his mission. In his last sight, Xie Lianying, Xie Ro, and Ding Ning had retreated to the front of the Zhou family's 3 black carriages. In the Xie family caravan, all of the cultivators were either dead or seriously injured. The shattered carriages and flesh flew everywhere. The situation looked terrible, but the Chu Dynasty Realm 7 expert who had caused this did not have a smug expression. He stopped and stood in this terrible scene. After a long moment of silence with his head bowed, he looked up and said, "Old Tong killed both of you, so from the start, you did not capture Chen Tuanyun's family." Ding Ning, Xie Lianying, and Xie Ro had also stopped. Xie Lianying took a deep breath. He met the Chu cultivator's gaze and nodded. He said, "You did not have enough time to capture the Chen family. You were only confused by your concern. In this situation, you will not have enough time to verify." A good plan. The Chu cultivator's breathing calmed, and he praised sincerely in a sharp voice. Chen Tuanyun died for nothing. Xie Lianying also grew silent. Just now, the Xie family cultivators were only able to stop this Chu cultivator a little. "How did you determine where I would land?" The Chu cultivator's gaze landed on Ding Ning. Even though he didn't know what kind of cultivators were hiding in those 3 black carriages, he understood extremely clearly that the reason Xie Lianying and Xie Ro were still alive was because this youth in front of him had accurately grasped the landing points of his 2 space leap talismans and immediately stopped his movements. Fu Su had flown out of the carriage and stood next to Ding Ning. Just now, in a few short moments, the battle of life and death surpassed anything he had seen in his usual cultivation. His body was still cold. Hearing the words of this Chu cultivator, he looked at Ding Ning with an incomprehensible gaze. He had the strongest parents in the world and the best teachers of the Qin dynasty. As a result, his cultivation progressed quickly, and he was exposed to many more things than ordinary cultivators. He knew that the flight seal could be tracked. It was a powerful flow of primal energies of the universe. The cultivator would appear to disappear in the air because the flow of primal energies of the universe was so fast that it surpassed the limits of the cultivator's eyes. But even if one knew that the enemy had such a seal weapon, in such a short time, it was usually impossible to determine where the other's primal energies of the universe would land. If the Space Leap Talisman was a bridge in the air, then the other fulcrum of the bridge was determined by the person who cast it. Ding Ning took a deep breath. Of course, he could not answer, but if he could not give a convincing reason, Forefather Zhou in the carriage behind him might be even more suspicious of him. So in this moment, he looked up and calmly answered, "That place is least likely to be intercepted by the 2 flying swords." Fu Su stilled and did not immediately understand the meaning of the words. This Realm 7 expert of the Chu dynasty frowned again. He thought back to the scene just now and slowly said, "Just like that." Ding Ning looked at him, nodded and said, "Just like that." Fu Su thought dazedly. Was it just because Xie Lianying and Xie Ro's bodies had coincidentally blocked the direction of the 2 flying swords behind them? "This one is Chen Chu of the Silver Thread Workshop." This Chu cultivator nodded and then said calmly. His gaze landed behind Ding Ning on the black carriage where Forefather Zhou was. These words were clearly directed at Forefather Zhou, but Fu Su and Xie Lianying's gazes focused at the same time. "I was wondering who it was. So it is the famed Silver Thread Divine Hand Chen Chu," Xie Lianying sneered, "and a powerful cultivator from the Chu court. It is my good fortune to meet him." Chen Chu was very famous. Only craftsmen who could reach the Silk Road level, who could accurately set up seal scripts on a hair-sized thread, could be called divine hands among the craftsmen of the Chu dynasty. There were only 5 divine hands in the Silver Thread Workshop. Chen Chu was not just a divine hand. He was also a Realm 7 expert. This was even rarer. He could create and use seal weapons that cultivators below Realm 7 could not comprehend. So he had become a court artificer a long time ago. However, Xie Lianying's sneer at this moment had other meanings. Many of the artificers of the Chu dynasty who stayed in the court had incomplete bodies. Chen Chu naturally sensed Xia Lianying's mockery, but he did not pay any attention to it. He only faintly sensed a dangerous aura from within the black horse carriage. He had to obtain more information to decide if he should flee or continue to fight. Ding Ning's eyebrows rose slightly. At this time, the curtains to Forefather Zhou's carriage parted. Dressed in loose brocade robes, Forefather Zhou slowly stood up and walked out of the carriage. "My surname is Zhou, and my name is Mei. Maybe it is a homonym of misfortune, so I have not been very lucky in this life." Forefather Zhou had a benevolent and amiable expression as he looked at this Chu court cultivator and spoke gently. "So it is him. He is not dead yet." Xia Lianying reacted instantly, and a voice of disbelief rang out in his heart. "I had not expected Forefather Zhou to still be alive. Old but strong." Chen Chu's eyes narrowed slightly, and his sharp voice sounded. His expression was also one of surprise. "The present Chongling is not the Chongling of your time." Chen Chu paused slightly. He looked at Forefather Zhou and said coolly, "Why do you have to interfere in a matter like this? Coincidentally encountering is an opportunity." Forefather Zhou looked amiably at Chen Chu and said, "You have two good items. I want to give them to the young person next to me." Chapter 181. Chen Chu looked coolly at Forefather Zhou and said calmly, "These two items are important treasures of the Chu dynasty." The two items Forefather Zhou spoke of were naturally the worry-free horn and the silver Rakshasa thumb ring on his body. But when he said these two items were important treasures of the Chu dynasty, he meant that he would bring these two items back to the Chu dynasty unless he died here. This was the same as what the swordsman of the Qin dynasty said. If the sword existed, the person existed. If the sword died, the person died. But when such a principle came from the mouth of a realm's 7 grandmaster, it had an unusual deterrent effect. An imperceptible greed flashed through Forefather Zhou's eyes. He smiled slightly and said, "The result is that you will stay behind as well." Chen Chu did not say anything else. He took a deep breath. Ignoring the injuries from the battle just now, he forced his true essence to surge through his body. His somewhat pale face began to emit a strange flush, and his black hair began to be dyed with frost. A lively and powerful presence was injected into the worry-free horn in his hand. In the next moment, the air in front of him suddenly scattered. The grass and leaves on the ground were all turned to powder. The 7-colored worry-free horn smashed towards Forefather Zhou in a domineering manner. Forefather Zhou narrowed his eyes. Ever since the Yuanwu Emperor had ascended the throne, he had never fought anyone. He felt unfamiliar with this suffocating pressure coming at him. Yet at the same time, he felt an itch in his bones. That feeling he had not felt for a long time was recovering. He stood where he was and raised his right hand slightly. With a crack, a black sword light flooded out of his fingers and accurately hit the worry-free horn. While it was the same method, the difference between his fiendish sword and Ding Ning's fiendish sword was like heaven and earth. Ding Ning's fiendish sword was only slightly crystalline on the surface, but his fiendish sword was like a black gem shining with light and even had a presence similar to the 9 Hell King's sword. A crisp sound was heard. This small black sword shattered into countless tiny crystal particles, but the worry-free horn that was charging forward suddenly slowed down and froze in the air. In the next breath, it was actually sent flying backwards by the power of these crystal particles. Chen Chu's frown deepened, and the strange blush on his face became brighter and more intense. This was the first round of probing. In the eyes of all the spectators, the result was extremely unfavorable to him. Forefather Zhou's fiendish energy had accumulated in his body for a long time and had reached an unimaginable level. His vital energy gathered together with the power of the worry-free horn, and everyone could sense that he was forcefully channeling his vital energy despite his injuries. In a situation where his internal organs were damaged, this kind of forceful use of true essence would naturally cause greater damage to his body, making it impossible for him to fight for a long time. But how could a fight between Realm Sevens be so simple? Sensing all the changes in Forefather Zhou's presence, as the small black sword struck the worry-free horn, Chun Chu found a sliver of hope in this seemingly hopeless battle. He once again took a deep breath. In a short time, the space in front of him was sucked into a vacuum. His right hand reached out towards the worry-free horn. Everyone thought that he was going to grab this seal weapon that had been knocked back. But in this moment, the many purple glowing droplets in his energy sea that no one else could sense exploded out of his right hand along his meridians. When these glowing purple droplets charged out of his fingertip, they turned into a purple crescent moon in front of him. The instant this purple crescent moon bloomed in front of him, there was a rumbling sound in the sky above, as if a huge gap had been opened. An exceptionally bright pillar of light seemed to transcend the limits of time, falling from the sky and landing on the purple crescent moon in front of him. Everyone was shocked. "What is going on?" Siap Ro exclaimed in disbelief. This purple crescent moon was clearly the life bond item of this Realm 7 Grandmaster. In the previous battles, this Realm 7 Grandmaster had always used external items to fight, causing people to suspect that he had a life bond item. The sudden appearance of a life bond item had already caused people to be so nervous they could not breathe. But the power contained in the pillar of light falling from the sky seemed to far surpass the power of this life bond item. This scene of the sky opening and terrifying energy falling down was clearly the scene of Realm 8 Heaven Opening Realm in some records. Ding Ning's expression was calm as he calmed his mind and sensed. He knew very well that the reason for such a phenomenon was because Chun Chu's life item was a special practitioner weapon. The Chu seal weapons are the best in the world, but they are just using external items to borrow the surface of Realm 8. How can they truly have the presence of Realm 8? Forefather Zhou looked up at the bright pillar of light falling from the sky and shook his head in sympathy. The worry-free horn was sent flying by the power of the purple crescent moon. Chun Chu did not pay attention to the worry-free horn. His entire person had merged into one with the purple crescent moon. His body was lifted up by the power of the purple crescent moon. Together with the purple crescent moon, he arrived in front of Forefather Zhou with a boom. Ding Ning, Fu Su, Xie Lianying, Xie Ro, the two carriage drivers of the Zhou family, the carriage, and even Forefather Zhou's body were blown back by an unstoppable gust of wind. His loose robes were blown close to Forefather Zhou's body by the gust of wind, revealing his originally concealed figure. There was a large gap at the side of his waist. It was deep inside his body, but his lower abdomen was bulging. It gave people the feeling that the piece of flesh that had been cut off was piled up inside his lower abdomen. Forefather Zhou's expression was stern. His 10 fingers spread open. 10 thin black crystals appeared between his fingers as if they were not real. However, they did not immediately turn into small swords. Instead, they floated in front of his hands. In the next moment, the sound of an enormous mountain moving came from the sky. Invisible primal energies of the universe flooded into his body and then furiously surged out of his skin along with his vital energy. The 10 thin black crystals merged with his vital energy and the terrifying amount of energy he had transported with his mountain-moving realm cultivation. They suddenly formed a black crescent moon. The black crescent moon gave off a terrifying presence of destruction and gave off black and white light. The surrounding world became pure black and white like ink garden. Everyone's body was bathed in black, and white as though they had been dragged into an ink scroll. This was the strongest killing essence of the painting remnant scroll. While Forefather Zhou's comprehension of the painting remnant scroll was slightly off, and he did not completely understand the meaning of profit and loss, after hundreds of years of study, he had a complete grasp of this killing essence. This was why, even though his energy sea was frozen, Zhang's son Qianxue, who possessed the Nine-Hell King sword, had said to Ding Ning that she was not certain of victory. The black and white light pierced the enormous pillar of light falling from the sky. The enormous pillar of light was also corroded by the black and white. The purple crescent moon quickly dimmed, and countless rust-like patterns appeared on its surface. His life bond item had been damaged to a certain extent. Chen Chu could not help but cough lightly. Crimson blood sprayed out of his nose and mouth. Beads of blood seeped out of his skin and made a hissing sound as though air was leaking out of his body. This was because the primal energies of the universe and vital energy in his body had reached their limits. Under the powerful impact, the primal energies of the universe in his meridian points were being squeezed out in threads. He knew that even if he won this battle, his cultivation would likely fall greatly in the future, and his injuries would be so serious that he would not be able to fight in the future. A hint of bitterness appeared at the corners of Chen Chu's mouth, but his eyes were determined and flashed with fanatical light. He reached out his hand again. Most of his vital energy flooded into the seal scripts of the silver Rakshasa thumb ring. A small but powerful silver flow of energy accurately charged into Forefather Zhou's body and into the empty space at his waist. This was the chance of victory he wanted at all costs. If such a powerful force charged into Forefather Zhou's old wounds, it would immediately tear apart all of Forefather Zhou's organs and destroy his energy sea. Even before death, Forefather Zhou would not be able to counterattack. Yet at this time, Chen Chu's body suddenly turned cold. He saw Forefather Zhou's eyes exude some smugness and pride. When that silver flow of energy charged into Forefather Zhou's body, it seemed to have charged into an empty space. To be more precise, this power of his had directly rushed into the sea of qi that had already been prepared there, like an open pocket. Even if ordinary people had a passage to their energy sea like this, if such a destructive power forced its way into the energy sea would be greatly damaged and the cultivator would immediately die. Yet, Forefather Zhou's body was like a frozen star space. Inside, it was filled with countless pieces of ice. The moment this silver flow of energy charged in, it was frozen. Chen Chu finally understood the situation inside Forefather Zhou's body, and why Forefather Zhou was slower than him. But at this time, he did not have the time to react. Forefather Zhou's left hand gently pressed against his chest. Strange sounds sounded from inside his body. In the next moment, the flesh on his back was pierced by the countless broken bones that rushed out of his body, bringing with them countless puffs of bloody mist. Chapter 182. Chen Chu's bones were shattered, and his organs were crushed into mush. But to everyone's surprise, he did not immediately fall down and die. He still stood and looked with a strange gaze at Forefather Zhou's bulging belly. What meaning is there? He was the loser of this battle. As a Grand Master of the Chu dynasty, he was about to die on the land of the Qin dynasty. Yet when he looked at Forefather Zhou, his sharp voice contained a strange sympathy. These words were hard to understand, but Forefather Zhou knew the meaning in his words. Even his energy sea was frozen to such a state, his organs were so damaged, his body was so old. He would use up large amounts of natural treasures every day. Living was not a pleasure. What was the meaning in a person who should have died before Emperor Yuanwu ascended the throne, living until now with a damaged body? Because he understood, Forefather Zhou's expression grew dark. Even a withered tree can come back in spring, much less just one step away from the sky. He looked coldly at Chinchu and said coldly, "A centipede dies but does not fall down. You want to reach the sky." Chinchu said mockingly. His strange and sympathetic gaze landed on Fu Su and Ding Ning, worms that are about to die and travel outside. Their actions are naturally poisonous. You have to be careful. Forefather Zhou sneered and did not say anything. With a soft pop, the last thread of power supporting Chen Chu disappeared from his body. He collapsed to the ground. His limp body could not be compared to the Realm 7 Grandmaster, who had slaughtered the Xie family caravan. Ding Ning was silent and bowed his head, slightly. Even if they were enemies, some people were worthy of respect. What do they want to do? Fu Su's gaze landed in the distance, on the dozen or so Xie family members who had been kidnapped, while the Xie family's plan had succeeded, and 2 cultivators disguised as Qin family women and children, successfully causing Qin Tunshin and this Realm 7 expert of the Chu dynasty to turn against each other because they had not expected the Qin family to have such a Realm 7 expert. The Xie family had paid a great price today. Of the 5 Realm 5 cultivators in the caravan, 3 were dead and 2 were seriously injured. At this time, the 2 cultivators disguised as the Qin family women had been exposed and died. The Xie family had nothing to fear. In his view, the remaining Qin family members were likely to kill the dozen Xie family members who had been kidnapped. However, the members of the Qin family, who had disguised themselves as mounted gangsters, did not do so. Furthermore, they did not flee immediately. It seemed that they were just waiting. They want to talk. Ding Ning looked up at Fu Su and Xie Lianying, saying, "Chun Tunshin is dead, but the Chun family still has many family members. They hope the Xie family can give them a way out. The key to doing business is to make money amicably, especially not to take the other's last bite." Xie Lianying nodded. He looked at Ding Ning with great satisfaction. He had seen countless young geniuses, but none of them satisfied him as much as Ding Ning. Who is in charge now? He took several steps forward, looking at the desolate and bleak figures of the Qin family members, and said calmly. A middle-aged man with an ordinary face and short hair got off his horse, took several steps forward, and bowed to Xie Lianying. "Release our people, return our goods, and the Xie family will not act against the Qin family." Xie Lianying nodded slightly in return, and then said meaningfully, "Your horses should be very fast." This middle-aged man, who had replaced Qin Tunshin as the Qin family manager, knew Xie Lianying's meaning. As long as the Xie family did not act against the Qin family, even if the news of this place spread, and everyone knew that the Qin family was a pawn placed in Guangzhong by the Chu dynasty, they would have enough time to take their family members and flee. "Many thanks. We owe the Xie family a favor." The middle-aged man bowed deeply again, and then turned to mount his horse. Today, they and the Xie family were mortal enemies, but now that victory was decided, they were truly grateful for the Xie family's promise. The thunderous sound of hooves sounded again. All of the Qin family members started to flee. Looking at the dozen Xie family members who were safe in the distance, Xie Lianying turned to look at Ding Ning and said softly but seriously, "Today, the Qin family owes us a favor, but the Xie family owes you a favor." Ding Ning said calmly, "Xie Changsheng is my friend." Xie Lianying stilled slightly. He laughed and said, "This good-for-nothing boy made some good friends." After saying this, he turned around and bowed seriously to Forefather Zhou. He said, "The Guangzhong Xie family thanks Elder for your help." Forefather Zhou's gloominess had disappeared from his face, and his expression recovered its benevolence. "Just a coincidence," Xie Lianying said seriously. "For Elder, it is a coincidence, but for us, it is a matter of life and death." Forefather Zhou looked at Qin Chu's corpse and said, "It is worth it to obtain Chu's heavy weapons." What did the Xie family transport? While Xie Lianing and forefather Zhou were talking, Ding Ning looked at Xie Ro and asked softly. Xie Ro hesitated for a moment, but still said softly, military equipment. Ding Ning frowned and asked, very big. Xie Ro did not say anything and nodded. Ding Ning said softly, transported to Deer Mountain? Xie Ro did not speak or nod. For Ding Ning, this was tacit agreement. Ding Ning frowned and said, how can they be reassured to have the Xie family transport? Military equipment was usually transported by the army themselves. Those that could not be transported by themselves were usually things that could not be transported by the army, were large in number, or were very large and heavy, and would delay the march of the army. The military equipment to be transported to Deer Mountain definitely represented the power of the dynasty, and were extremely intimidating. Even if such military equipment was given to the Xie family to transport, how could it not be escorted by important cultivators of the court? Xie Ro took a deep breath. This matter was extremely confidential and could not be spread. But the Xie family was able to escape this calamity thanks to Ding Ning. Also, Ding Ning had already guessed. There was no meaning in concealing it. We are only transporting some parts and spare parts of the military equipment, not the most important parts. Xie Ro looked at Ding Ning and said softly, even if the Chun family stole our goods, I fear they do not know that it is a part of a certain military equipment. The same words caused different waves in Ding Ning and Fu Su's minds. Other than the Golden Crow flame, does Chongling have an even stronger military equipment? Ding Ning frowned deeply and felt slightly uneasy. Fu Su was shocked beyond words. Could it be that the item was finally completed? The dozen people from the Xie family who had been robbed were galloping over. Xie Ro immediately went forward to ask. When she returned to Ding Ning and Ding Ning's side, Ding Ning frowned and asked, is there a problem with the goods transported? Even someone like Chen Chu could not see it. There is no problem. Xie Ro's eyes flashed with indescribable joy. Thanks to you, I asked. Chen Chu inspected, but did not find any problems. He thought it was the embryos used to make crossbows. Ding Ning frowned deeply, and his body began to be filled with coldness. The embryos of ordinary crossbows were naturally round and slender objects. If the army could not transport them themselves, there would be an astounding number of them. For him, this meant that a certain idea of the Bazin Kendo ground had become reality. If it was, as he thought, then the Yuanwu Emperor's throne would become even more indestructible. The Xie family started to clean up the mess. The dozen Xie family members who had been kidnapped were extremely tired, but at least they had not suffered any serious injuries. The worry-free horn, the silver Rakshasa thumb ring, and Chun Chu's life bond item were all collected by the Xie family and delivered to forefather Zhou. Chun Chu's life bond item had been compressed into numerous glowing droplets in his body, but now it was a purple jade the size of a fingernail. It was also not in the shape of a crescent moon. The edges were irregular, and it looked like a piece that had split off from something. After a casual glance, forefather Zhou called out gently for Ding Ning and Fu Su to return to him. Your sword is not ordinary, but it is incomplete. It is not worthy of you in the future. This worry-free horn is suitable for the White Goat Cave's White Goat Sword Manual, but do not use it easily. If such an important weapon of the Chu is easily revealed, the cultivators of the Chu dynasty will fight for it. Forefather Zhou looked kindly at Ding Ning and gave the worry-free horn to Ding Ning. Just now, you have seen the wonders of this silver Rakshasa thumb ring. You also have to use it carefully. Then he gave the silver Rakshasa thumb ring to Fu Su. These two items were truly important, even more important than the snow dandelion sword that Li Lingjun had given to Mo Chun in the past. But as he expressed his thanks, An unusual emotion flashed through Ding Ning's eyes, whose coldness had not dissipated. Forefather Zhou could not be so generous. Even if he wanted to show generosity, for Forefather Zhou, Fu Su was just a friend who had come with him. He did not need to give such an important weapon to Fu Su. Forefather Zhou's actions were definitely unusual. Chapter 183. The setting sun burned like blood. Ding Ning watched as the Xie family members left. On the road in the distance, the figures of the Xie family became smaller and smaller. In the end, they became black dots, as if they were about to melt into the crimson sunset. Ding Ning's expression grew more solemn. The Chun family was one of the wealthiest families in Guangzhou. Today, they had revealed their identity as Chu spies, and even a Realm 7 Grandmaster like Chen Chu, who was rare even among Chu cultivators, had died here. Both Chun Tunshan's death and the battle between Chen Chu and the Xie family cultivators were tragic, but he knew this was just a small shadow of the Deer Mountain Conference. At this time, there would be many Grandmasters like Chen Chu, who were usually high up and did not enter the mortal world. They would travel everywhere just to stop a cultivator, to stop some of the army's food and weapons, just to affect the Deer Mountain Conference. Under such a storm, everyone was as minuscule as the Xie family members who were about to merge into the red sunset. But in each of these shadows, there were many people who performed brilliantly and were worthy of respect. It was these countless silhouettes that formed the real history and allowed the people to live and work in peace and contentment on the vast land. These people should not be erased from the history books. Otherwise, this would be as unfair as Zhang Sun Qianxue said. The Zhou family carriage had been repaired, but Forefather Zhou, sitting in the carriage, did not give the order to depart until all the Xie family members disappeared on the distant path. His expression grew colder, and the parts of his body below his abdomen grew colder. He even started to lose feeling. Chen Chu had risked serious damage to his life bond item in order to destroy his energy sea and kill him, but he had not expected this to be the death door he had left for Chen Chu from the start. In a battle between Realm Sevens, life and death were decided in such a swift and seemingly ordinary way. From any perspective, Forefather Zhou's victory today was a textbook battle, a victory based on experience and intelligence. But Forefather Zhou had overlooked one point. Even though he had perfectly utilized the flaws in his body was no longer the same as before. He had accurately calculated Chen Chu's strength. He had calculated that the Yuan Qi that was about to burst into his energy sea would be instantly frozen. However, he never expected that his body's 5 Qis were already out of balance. All these years, he had only barely managed to adjust them with medicine. Ordinary cultivators, even those with much lower cultivation than him, would naturally adjust when the 5 energies in their bodies were slightly out of balance. It was only a matter of time, and they would not be injured at all. But he was different. When the wild energy charged into his body, threads of scattered energy seeped into his energies. Like a chain reaction, it caused an uncontrollable change. The medicine that he had carefully prepared and stored in his body were unable to adjust this disorder at all. To his body, it had instead become a deadly poison. His sea of qi froze even more. The meridians below the abdomen were completely frozen. At this time, he could no longer walk, and it was also impossible for him to force his true essence below his abdomen. Everything today had originally been under his control. If Xie Lianying was killed, Xie Rou might be easily controlled by him. In the near future, it was possible for him to slowly consume the Xie family. Yet, all of this was unexpected because of Ding Ning. Thinking of Ding Ning's performance in today's battle, Forefather Zhou's frosty face started to fill with viciousness. "Come here." He slowly spoke to Ding Ning and Fu Su. Ding Ning, who was silently watching the sunset glow burning on the road in the distance, raised his eyebrows slightly. However, from Forefather Zhou's slightly different tone, he knew that something was going to happen. But he still calmly turned around and walked towards Forefather Zhou's carriage. Fu Su had no wariness towards Forefather Zhou, but when he walked next to Ding Ning and stopped, his pupils contracted as he sensed great danger. The benevolence in his eyes turned into incomprehension and unease. His black hair danced as though a power was about to shoot out. Yet, he did not have time to do anything. A black stream of air pushed open the curtains of the carriage and rushed into his body. His body froze. His blood and vital energy were immediately frozen and unable to flow. In the next moment, his body was covered in thick black frost. Ding Ning, who was beside him, was the same. A cracking sound was heard. 2 more flashing white energies flowed out of the carriage and landed on Ding Ning and Fu Su's bodies. This white flow of energy was very gentle, but it pushed some exceptionally cold energy into the depths of Ding Ning and Fu Su's bodies. In their perception, whether it was in their sea of qi or in many of the meridians in their bodies, they were all filled with condensed black ice. These black ice were like countless reefs that blocked the waterways. Blood and energy could slowly flow and maintain the vitality of the body, but once vital energy flowed, it would immediately shatter into powerless waves and bubbles. Why? After the black frost on his body shattered and fell off, Fu Su found that he could speak and immediately asked in disbelief. Forefather Zhou did not immediately answer his puzzlement. He looked coldly at Ding Ning through the carriage curtain. Ding Ning slowly looked up. His body could move right now, but any movement, any part of his body was filled with numbness and pain like a pair of legs that had been sitting for a long time. There is no reason. From the start, I never thought of letting you go. Forefather Zhou laughed savagely and viciously. He looked at Ding Ning and started to answer Fu Su's question. From the moment you helped your senior and junior sect brothers in Ink Garden comprehend many of the cultivation methods of the Zhou family's painting remnant scroll, your outcome was decided. After a pause, Forefather Zhou said disdainfully, the painting remnant scroll is the foundation of the Zhou family in Chongling. For the Zhou family, there are countless powerful possibilities. How can some of the secrets, especially the star fiendish methods, be spread outside? While he was talking, Ding Ning didn't say anything. Some invisible little silkworms silently appeared in his body and started to consume the black ice in his body. There were very few little silkworms. Ding Ning was not in a hurry and sensed the speed at which these little silkworms consumed. At this time, Forefather Zhou's face only overlapped with the face of the Forefather Zhou he was familiar with, so his emotions did not change much. But next to him, Fu Su grew angry. The anger of being deceived caused Fu Su's body to tremble violently. Since you already had such thoughts, why did you treat Ding Ning and me like this? What do you want to use us for? He took a deep breath and gritted his teeth as he looked at Forefather Zhou. He said angrily, if you have always been pretending, then why not continue to pretend? Because pretending is very tiring. Forefather Zhou said disdainfully, especially pretending in front of 2 juniors that you can easily kill. This feeling is very uncomfortable. Ding Ning had not spoken up until now. At this time, he completely sensed the speed at which these little silkworms were consuming the black ice in his body. He said in a slightly cold voice, very uncomfortable, in order to not make Xia Lianying suspicious, you purposefully gave us 2 Chu Dynasty seal weapons. Even I feel disgusted when I think about it now. Forefather Zhou's eyes narrowed slightly, and he said coldly, you do not seem to be very afraid. Ding Ning did not disguise his disdain and sneered. If you wanted to kill us, You would have killed us long ago. Why wait until now? Especially when you wanted to take us to Deer Mountain from so far away. We naturally have value. You cannot control yourself now. I fear that just now, the battle with Chunchu will not be as easy as it appears. You fear you cannot control us. Forefather Zhou narrowed his eyes, and his pupils contracted. He exuded unimaginable coldness. You have good eyes. Forefather Zhou did not deny it, and said coldly, but if you want to blame someone, blame just now for not listening to my orders and acting on your own. Otherwise, even if you died, you would not have suffered so much. What do you want to use us for? Fu Su did not have much fear on his face, only anger. You will know when you reach Wu Mountain. I will not make you wait for long. Forefather Zhou looked down at his legs that had lost all feeling. He said cruelly, because from the start, I did not plan on having you go to Deer Mountain. I will have you die in Wu Mountain. Fu Su still wanted to say something. However, Ding Ning stood in front of him and did not allow him to speak. Get on the carriage. Forefather Zhou said coldly. When he said these words, he did not know that in the opposite direction of the sunset glow, in the distant white clouds behind him, there was a pure white shadow flying. It was like a huge fish with white scales on its body. However, it had a pair of pure white wings. Two long fleshy feelers were also white and slowly floated in the air. There were two figures sitting on the back of this strange bird. Chapter 184. One of the two figures was an old man with white hair and beard that hung down like ginseng. He was the teacher of the bureau chief of the clan law bureau, Huang Jinwei, and the Yuanwu emperor. The outside world knew very little about this old man. Almost no one even knew his name. The only thing certain was that his cultivation was very high, and he knew many cultivation theories. He was also very old, and had once been the teacher of the previous emperor. A person like this naturally had extraordinary intelligence. The person sitting respectfully next to him was not Huang Jinwei, who had been studying with him in Chongling, but the dignified palace attendant who often came in and out of the empress' study. She had a small pearl the size of a pigeon egg, with countless mirrors in her hand. While she was far away from Forefather Zhou, Ding Ning, Fu Su, and the others, she seemed to be able to see everything happening around Forefather Zhou, Fu Su, and Ding Ning from the pearl. Official, this person is so vicious. Should we kill him? Seeing Fu Su and Ding Ning being controlled by Forefather Zhou, this dignified palace attendant's eyes turned cold as she asked. She did not ask, "Sir, if you want to kill him," but "if you want to kill him." This meant that she had the ability to kill Forefather Zhou even without the old man acting. If we wanted to kill him, we could have killed him when we came out of Chongling. Forefather Zhou is a worm that does not die. How can he have good intentions? But he is a Grand Master of the Qin dynasty. He may have some use on this trip to Deer Mountain. Hearing the palace attendant's murderous words, the old man smiled slightly and said, "Also, I want to see what he wants to do." The palace attendant put away her anger and said slowly that wine shop youth is not bad. The old man nodded gently and said, "But we have to see if he can pass this and the Min Mountain Sword trials." The palace attendant was silent. Many breaths later, she asked respectfully, "Even you do not have absolute confidence in this conference?" Back then, our army killed 400,000 elite soldiers of the Zhao dynasty. Everyone thought that the Zhao dynasty would be completely destroyed in the following month. The old man looked down and said slowly, "But a Zhao sword furnace that suddenly appeared caused our army to be unable to advance. Later on, when our dynasty lost the war against the Chu dynasty, A large part of the reason was that our dynasty had lost too many excellent cultivators in the Zhao lands. That's just Zhao. There are too many capable people in the world. The old man looked at the wrinkles on his hands and said, "The rise and fall of a dynasty is never something a cultivator can decide. No one can guarantee what kind of grandmaster will appear in the Deer Mountain Conference this time. The grandmaster of the Zhao sword furnace back then is the best example." The reason I say the Min Mountain Sword Trials is a test he must pass is because, according to my knowledge, only some of the methods of Min Mountain Sword Sect can keep him alive. As to the fact that the Deer Mountain Conference was an obstacle he had to pass, it was because the Deer Mountain Conference was related to all the cultivators of the Qin. If there is chaos, cultivators like them will not be able to cultivate in peace. The palace attendant took a deep breath and did not speak. She had thought that she was just worrying for nothing, but had not expected that even the teacher of the Holy Son of Heaven was deeply worried. What she had not expected was that what the old man was truly worried about was the 9-death silkworm that had appeared. The emperor is at Deer Mountain. More than half of the power of the Qin dynasty has left Chongling. If he really is your heir, what will he do at this time? The old man was undoubtedly one of the people who knew that person's abilities the best. So in his view, if there was a person who could have a fatal effect on the Qin dynasty, then this person would be the heir left behind by that person. But this wise old man would never have thought that the 9-death silkworm he was truly worried about was right in front of him. There were evil waters between the Wu Mountains. There were almost no merchant ships or fishing boats traveling in the turbulent mountain rivers. There were not many people on the shores, and only the occasional cries of apes. But at this time, there were more than a dozen armored ships traveling in one of the evil waters. On the leading ship stood a man dressed in light yellow dragon robes. While he looked calmly at the floating clouds in the sky and the waves in the water, this evil river seemed to be suppressed by his presence, becoming oppressive and respectful. Even the flow of the river was much calmer than usual. Behind him stood many generals in black armor and important people of Chongling. He was naturally the most important person of this Deer Mountain Conference, the Yuanwu Emperor of the Qin dynasty. While even his teacher did not have absolute confidence that the Qin dynasty could regain face in this Deer Mountain Conference, everyone knew that the reason for his lack of confidence was because he was the common enemy of the other 3 dynasties. An ape's cry came from the mountains on the 2 shores and then quickly disappeared as though it had fled far away. This sharp cry caused the Yuanwu Emperor's eyebrows to move slightly, and he stopped thinking. He waved his hand behind him and said, "Bureau Chief Huang, come forward." Huang Jinwei, who had been standing respectfully on the side of the deck and looking at the dangerous forests on the 2 shores, stilled slightly. Then he walked behind the Yuanwu Emperor and was 2 steps behind him. "Stand shoulder to shoulder with me," the Yuanwu Emperor said without turning his head to look at him, his hands behind his back. Huang Jinwei took a deep breath. He was shocked, but did not say anything. He walked forward and stood on the right side of the Yuanwu Emperor. They stood side by side and looked at the waves hitting the rocks in front of them. "You are the person I chose. I had my teacher teach you. Strictly speaking, you are my junior sect brother." The Yuanwu Emperor said slowly, "The reason I chose you is because you are a true national scholar. You know and understand that everything I do is for the dynasty to become stronger, so that the people of the world can live and work in peace. You are the person most loyal to me in Chongling." Huang Jinwei nodded slightly in thanks for the Yuanwu Emperor's praise. But inside, he could not help but think, in the eyes of the emperor, he was the most loyal to him. Then were the 2 ministers, the empress, and his teacher not the most loyal to him? You must find it strange why I called you to come forward and stand shoulder to shoulder with me. The Yuanwu Emperor looked at the nearby Deer Mountain and said to Huang Jinwei, "This is because even the strongest emperor is a person and has his own emotions." Huang Jinwei could not help but glance at him and said softly, "This subject does not understand. 3 years before I ascended the throne, no one in the entire Qin dynasty dared to stand shoulder to shoulder with me." The Yuanwu Emperor slowly said, "Originally, I should have had many people standing shoulder to shoulder with me at this kind of occasion, but they were too stubborn. In the end, I was the only one standing at the bow of the ship and leading the Qin dynasty forward. 3 years before I ascended the throne, I became this lonely one." Huang Jinwei's breathing paused slightly. His gentle and scholarly expression did not change, but his heart tightened slightly. He knew that the emperor's emotions were due to nostalgia and remembering the past, but he did not know what true emotions were contained in this nostalgia. "This lonely one has you come forward because I want you to fight shoulder to shoulder with me at the Deer Mountain Conference." The Yuanwu Emperor did not look at him. He said softly in a sigh or praise, "After this conference, this lonely one will become the true lonely one." Huang Jinwei's eyes suddenly showed unprecedented shock. "This lonely one will become the true lonely one." These words were hard to pronounce, but when he heard the Yuanwu Emperor change his previous title and call himself this lonely one, he clearly sensed the true meaning. The Holy One had such great confidence in the upcoming Deer Mountain Conference. A streak of black light descended from the sky. It was a black-feathered goshawk. The goshawk landed on the arm of a black-armored general. The black-armored general took out a secret document from a small metal tube tied to its leg and handed it to an abnormally fat man beside him. This unusually fat man gave off a domineering presence. He was another important person in Chongling, Marquis Su of Mount Hung. Marquis Su took a few steps forward, his footsteps causing the entire ship to shake. The first to ascend Deer Mountain was the Chu King. The Chu King worshipped the heavens at Deer Mountain and established Li Lingjun as the crown prince. Marquis Su, who had read the secret document, stood behind the Yuanwu Emperor and said softly, "The first to ascend the mountain was the Chu, and the first to die will be the Chu." The Yuanwu Emperor smiled proudly, without any surprise. He said slowly, "This has nothing to do with the Chu King's old age and who takes over the throne. A dynasty that relies too much on external objects will naturally lose their own spirit. Great Chu can produce true craftsmen, but it can never produce true grandmasters of cultivation." Marquis Su smiled domineeringly. At this time, among the various dynasties, the Chu dynasty was the strongest, but even in his eyes, the Chu dynasty was the weakest opponent. Chapter 185. The sky was full of stars. Looking at the stars from the mountain peak, those stars were especially clear. Even the usually invisible silver galaxies were reflected in Li Lingjuan's eyes. The reason this rare conference was chosen to be held at Deer Mountain was because of its unique location. Looking from the mountain peak, one could see the territories of multiple dynasties, and the world was under their feet. Another reason was because of Deer Mountain's height and peace. While Deer Mountain was tall, there was a large patch of flat land at the top. Walking there, one did not seem to be on the mountain peak, but on the plains. At this time, in front of Li Lingjun, a small palace had been built on the flat land at the peak of Deer Mountain. The palace was slender and exquisite, causing people to think of thin waists. An exquisite red carpet led to this palace that had been built in a day. On the two sides of the red carpet were the Chu beauties and powerful cultivators. Seeing Li Lingjun walk over, these beauties and powerful cultivators all bowed in greeting. Today, the Chu dynasty was the first to ascend Deer Mountain. He had been conferred the title of Crown Prince. At this time, among the beauties and cultivators kneeling on both sides. Many of them were existences he had to carefully study and even look up to. Looking at these people's respectful and even fearful and regretful appearances, Li Lingjun felt very strange. He should have felt deep hatred towards these people, including his father king in the palace. Yet when he was made the crown prince, this hatred seemed to have dissipated. But perhaps because he had stayed in Chongling for too long, he felt unfamiliarity when looking at these Chu people. He felt like he was a Qin person looking at these Chu people. The Chu crown prince was fated to be the future king of Chu, but before he ascended the throne, the master of the Chu dynasty was still the old man in the palace. According to the rules, he still had to pay his respects in the morning and evening. Walking into the quiet palace, his eyes immediately flashed with an inconceivable emotion. On the pure gold dragon couch, there was no sign of the emperor, whose face was covered in age spots. Do not worry. Just like how you did not expect him to leave after ascending Deer Mountain, no one in the world will know that he will leave Deer Mountain at this time. Consort Zhao Xiang, dressed in light robes, looked at his shocked features and said, "Before the Deer Mountain Conference starts, he will naturally return." Li Lingjun suppressed his shock, his gaze still fixed on the empty dragon bed. He asked softly, "Where did father go, and what does he want to do?" Consort Zhao shook her head and looked at him seriously. "Even I don't know." Li Lingjun was shocked, speechless. It was unreasonable for a monarch to travel on his own. Also, his body was not in good condition. The Deer Mountain Conference that would decide the fate of the Chu and the entire world was about to start if his father, King Wuya of Chu, who still controlled the entire Chu dynasty, met with an accident before the Deer Mountain Conference. He didn't even dare to think about it because he knew that with his present abilities, he could not deal with and control a situation like this. The Chu emperor, rumored to have been robbed of his body by wine and women, was gravely ill and feared would not live for long, had suddenly left after ascending Deer Mountain. The strongest emperor in the history of the Qin dynasty, the Yuan Wu emperor, had taken the path of Wu Mountain. The armored ships were quickly approaching Deer Mountain. At this time, Ding Ning and Fu Su were entering Wu Mountain. Forefather Zhou had not entered Wu Mountain from any of the Qin dynasty's checkpoints. Without checkpoints, this meant that there were no roads that normal carriages could travel. The Zhou family's carriages had been abandoned long ago. Even the 3 carriage drivers did not follow them into Wu Mountain. In the damp and pathless forest, Ding Ning swung the last flower remnant sword to open a path. Behind him, Fu Su carried forefather Zhou, who could not move his limbs, and followed closely behind. The thick mist had soaked through Ding Ning and Fu Su's clothing, adding on the water droplets falling from the leaves in the forest. Every corner of Ding Ning and Fu Su's clothing started to drip water. Wet and cold, the mountain path was steep and pathless, and there were countless snakes and insects moving through the forest. They had to be vigilant at all times. Even if Ding Ning and Fu Su's vital energy could flow, this kind of journey could not be described as easy. Also, their vital energy was sealed, and even their energies were slow. Knowing that forefather Zhou would not act before reaching his goal, both Ding Ning and Fu Su's attitudes were not respectful. The blood in half of your body has been completely frozen. Even I can judge that in less than half a year, your entire body will stiffen to death. Fu Su was usually kind, but at this time, his entire body was sore. Also, he had to carry a person he hated in such an uncomfortable environment. His tone was full of disdain. With your body, you are not preparing for your funeral in Chongling, but coming to such a barren place. What do you want to do? Not many days had passed since the battle with Chunchu. At this time, forefather Zhou's presence was slowly releasing to maintain his body's dryness and cleanliness. However, his face was much thinner, and wrinkles appeared on his smooth skin. A large tree might have been hollowed out by insects, but its roots were still strong, and its branches and leaves could be maintained. But if even its roots were withered and its energies were in chaos, then this tree was fated to wither quickly. Hearing Fu Su's disdain, Forefather Zhou was not angry at all. The hatred in his eyes had long disappeared into a kind of cold calmness. We are all in similar situations. There is no need to mock each other. While I do not know why you came to this Wu Mountain, if you wanted to come, you would have come long ago. Why did you make me come with you? Hearing Fu Su's disdain and Forefather Zhou's answer, Ding Ning turned to look at Forefather Zhou and asked calmly. Forefather Zhou looked at Ding Ning with true admiration and answered, because you are the cultivator with the greatest comprehension ability I have ever seen. I have seen many cultivators with astounding comprehension abilities, but none of them comprehended as quickly as you. In reality, I suspect that even if I did not teach you, you would have comprehended the star fiendish condensation method from the painting remnant scroll. Ding Ning did not look back. He raised an eyebrow and said, one question each. Forefather Zhou smiled disapprovingly and nodded. He said, without my guidance, did you comprehend the star fiendish condensation method from the painting remnant scroll that day? Ding Ning nodded to show that he admitted it, and then asked, from what you said, you want someone with a strong comprehension ability and a fast comprehension speed to help you. Why? Forefather Zhou looked at his back and said, you will naturally know when the time comes. Fu Su immediately grew angry and said, you did not keep your word. Taking you to see with your own eyes does not mean I did not keep my word. Forefather Zhou said in a cold voice, your talent is not bad. I hope that you will not disappoint me at that time. Otherwise, I will quickly kill you and then return to Chongling to prepare for my funeral. Ding Ning walked in silence for a moment and then suddenly said, I heard that while Wu Mountain is like Ba Mountain, surrounded by mountains that even hunters cannot go deep, and is suitable for seclusion cultivation and building a hidden sect that cannot be disturbed by the outside world, the climate of Wu Mountain is too damp and cold, and is not good for the bodies of cultivators. Also, since ancient times, there has not been a single spirit vein, so almost no sects have been established here, and no ancient sect ruins have been left behind. But because it is so barren, even cultivators do not come out, so there are many vicious beasts and spirit medicines in many places. Some ancient cultivation sects have discovered spirit medicines or useful vicious beasts. However, the spirit medicines or vicious beasts have not fully matured yet. They are also afraid of being discovered and robbed by other sects, so they would often order the powerful cultivators of the sect to lay down some powerful formations to trap them and prevent them from being discovered by the outside world. After saying this, Ding Ning looked back at Forefather Zhou and asked coolly, is it spirit medicines or beasts? Fu Su was slightly startled. He finally reacted. Forefather Zhou immediately frowned. A sharp light flashed through his eyes. As expected, you are the best strategist of two-level tower. If you can really help me this time, I will give you a chance to choose. He took a deep breath and looked at Ding Ning. He slowly said, help the Zhou family or die. Have you ever thought about what kind of power the Zhou family, the Xie family, and two-level tower will become? Then become the strongest family in Chongling, and then have your liver and intestines cut off by someone? Before Fu Su could imagine such a scene, Ding Ning started to laugh. Buffed, Fu Su could not help but laugh. This really touched Forefather Zhou's reverse scale. In a moment, his hair and beard danced. A terrifying presence swept out with him as the center and formed walls of wind. How much longer? Ding Ning, who was swaying in the wind, looked unconcernedly at the snarling Forefather Zhou. He said coolly, rather than wasting this kind of energy, it is better to open a path for me. so we can reach that place faster. Maybe I can see some clues faster. Forefather Zhou forced down the murderousness filling his body. He closed his eyes and did not speak, but his body started to release a sharp presence that pointed in front of Ding Ning, like an invisible sword. It opened a path for people to quickly move forward. Under the refraction of many tiny water droplets, there were no rainbows, but golden pillars of light. Fusu's breathing paused slightly. He unconsciously thought of the words that Forefather Zhou had said. He sensed that some of the golden pillars of light were different. At this time, Ding Ning had sensed what kind of formation this was. His gaze landed on one of the bowl-like valleys. Much of the true fire energy in the pillars of light that fell into the valley was absorbed by the valley. Invisible water vapor rose from the pillars of light. These pillars of light became unique channels for the water vapor to flow. In his eyes, the scenes in front of him became pure lines again. Countless streams of true fire fell, and countless streams of water vapor intermingled with the true fire and soared upwards. His eyes could not see the exact situation at the bottom of the valley, but he seemed to see all the paths at the bottom of the valley. "Let's go." He turned to look at Forefather Zhou and said calmly, "However, you have to take us down this time. Otherwise, if I am too tired, I may not be able to comprehend the method to enter the formation door." Fu Su was shocked again. He looked in disbelief at Ding Ning. "You are really sure where the formation door is?" Ding Ning glanced at him and said, "Since it is similar to how the three emperors' sect mixed fire and water in the past, and also wants to hide the presence of the seal as much as possible, there will naturally be many channels to guide wind. There will naturally be more than one formation door that can be entered." After a pause, Ding Ning continued, "It is not hard to find a formation door that can be entered. The difficult part is how to resolve the killing power in the formation door." Forefather Zhou's eyes had been filled with disbelief. He did not believe that Ding Ning could see the clues so quickly. But when he heard Ding Ning's words, he took a deep breath. His heart uncontrollably beat violently. "You know a lot," he said slowly. A bone-chilling wind rose from the cliffs. He, Ding Ning, and Fu Su floated up from this protruding rock, passed through the mist below, and slowly floated towards the mountain valley. Goddess Peak might have been the only mistake of the person who had set up this formation in the past. After leaving Goddess Peak and landing in the forest below, even Ding Ning could not sense anything unusual about the golden pillars of light. The person who had set up the formation back then had likely been in the mountains and had not detected that in some places on Goddess Peak, at some special times, this formation would show signs of being detected. The mountain valley where this formation was located was very flat. The short trees that stretched as far as the eye could see were soaked in milky mist. It did not look like dry land, but a deep lake. Based on Ding Ning's memories, they landed on the outskirts of the mountain valley. Even Fu Su could clearly sense an ancient presence ahead that gathered in the bright light and spread through the mountain valley. There was also a presence of wind and water that shot into the sky like a fountain, as though it would pierce a hole in the sky. Forefather Zhou's face flushed with an unusual red. He had used a very stupid method to find one of the entrances to this formation. This clear and similar presence caused him to be certain that Ding Ning's judgment was correct. Ding Ning's brows furrowed deeply, and he glanced at the grass and trees around him with an extremely cold gaze. A cultivator who could set up a formation like this far surpassed ordinary realm sevens. There should be many places inside that could pose a true threat to Forefather Zhou. So he did not care about Forefather Zhou's thoughts. He focused on studying and sensing this formation that he had only read about in ancient texts and had never seen before. The mist was extremely dense. There was clearly wind flowing around him, but when it blew in front of him, it suddenly disappeared. Even the mist inside did not move, and the grass and trees in the mist were frozen in the air as if they were absolutely still. In this moment, Ding Ning felt pain. The moving plants in the mist turned into countless lines. These lines contained killing intent. They were like countless thorns that filled his body, causing him to feel suffocated and speechless. Phew! A mouthful of blood erupted uncontrollably from his lips. He looked at Ding Ning and shook his head. The entire formation is like a bowl filled with water. When the water in one part of the bowl is lacking, the water in other parts will naturally gather. Also, the places with less water will be attacked by the power of the entire formation. I understand this. Ding Ning nodded and turned to look at Forefather Zhou. So you have to be fast. Forefather Zhou stilled. Light flashed in his eyes as he understood something. When the water in one part of the bowl is lacking, the water in other parts will naturally gather. But if we are fast enough, we can pass before the water in other parts flows in. Ding Ning slowly took a deep breath and said, in order for us to pass quickly enough, we need to channel the water. You have to open some passageways as quickly as possible and let the energy inside pour out. Ding Ning, I have to admit that you are a true genius. Forefather Zhou looked deeply at Ding Ning, a hint of a snarl appearing at the corner of his mouth. He looked up with narrowed eyes at the golden pillars of light in the sky. The cold, fiendish energy in his body started to slowly release. His energy sea that was almost frozen could not endure the intense battle, but it was not difficult for him to slowly release the cold, fiendish energy in his body to block the golden light entering the formation door. Wisps of black flame aura flowed out of his fingertips like cold-blooded poisonous snakes, rising upwards. The joy in his heart was also rising like these flames of arrogance. He had waited for 30 years. Also, the state of his body and cultivation determined that he could not force his way through the formation door like he did 30 years ago. Today, this wine shop youth's astounding performance caused him to feel like spring was coming. All of his waiting had been worth it. However, it was also at this moment that he sensed something unusual. He abruptly turned his head, his somewhat dark face suddenly becoming incomparably pale. What had happened? Ding Ning and Fu Su also sensed that unusual presence and turned around at the same time. They and Forefather Zhou were looking at several white clouds floating in the sky. The edges of the white clouds were gilded gold by the golden pillars of light falling from the sky. Yet, at this moment, a black ball of light was rising from below these white clouds. The golden beams of light landed on the dark ball of light, but there was no sound, and no light came out from the bottom of the dark ball of light. Only the places where the golden beams of light came into contact with the dark ball of light constantly emitted a cold black curtain of light, which spread outwards layer by layer. That patch of sky grew darker at a visible rate, looking more and more like a black seal paper. This was not like the night, because the night also had starlight and moonlight. This thick black was suffocating. Fu Su finally reacted. He looked at the black sky that almost covered half of the mountain valley. He looked at the border where the golden pillars of light and the thick black intersected. He said in shock, "There are others?" Ding Ning did not speak. Forefather Zhou also did not speak. It was also at this moment that a muffled boom rang out. It was as if someone had moved a huge mountain and forcefully smashed it into the calm surface of a lake for no reason. At the same time, the ground under the trio's feet started to tremble. Then a wild wind rose. The energy and mist in the mountain valley parted to the sides, like a tide. Ding Ning's clothes flapped loudly. His thin and weak body was almost blown away by the strong wind and the mist used to blow him away. But he still tried to narrow his eyes and look towards where the black ball of light was rising. There was light under the black sky. He saw an old figure, his entire body giving off pure white flames as though it was burning. A wide path appeared in front of this old figure. All the weeds and trees on the path were snapped and spread to the sides of the path. Forefather Zhou's body was soaked in cold sweat. This was the same solution as Ding Ning had said. Yet this person's solution was even more brutal. They did not just channel the formation, but took advantage of the weakening of the formation door to forcefully break it open. This kind of method meant that this person was far stronger than him. Who was it that possessed such power? Who was it that had discovered the spirit array here and wanted to break in today? The mist in the mountain valley was pushed away by the explosive power. While they were several miles away when Ding Ning and the others saw the old man also saw Forefather Zhou, Ding Ning and Ding Ning. A hint of surprise rose in the old man's eyes. This old man was naturally the king of Chu. The reason the Deer Mountain Conference was set at Deer Mountain at this time was because of his arrangements and calculations. After obtaining what was here, he would return to Deer Mountain and verify with the strongest people in the world. Of course, he had not expected that someone else would discover the secret of this place. Also, this person seemed to have entered the formation like him and came here today to prepare to break in. But even if countless people discovered the secret of this place, the person who could obtain what was here would be the first to enter. First come, first served. Just one step away was fate. So the king of Chu smiled warmly at Ding Ning, Fu Su and Forefather Zhou in the distance without any murderousness or viciousness. Then he started to move towards the wide path that had appeared ahead of him. The wild wind rose again. The mist that had parted to the two sides of the mountain valley had gathered back, and with even more astounding power. The wild wind was even faster. Who is it? Under the cover of the white mist, Forefather Zhou could not see the figure of the cultivator who had just attacked, but he knew who it was. In all of Chongling, only one cultivator could display such great power from such a distance. There was no doubt about the identity of this cultivator, but how could he appear here? Forefather Zhou's body was filled with terror. His cold sweat snaked across his body like small streams. But he was an experienced old man and instinctively sensed that this was his chance. His entire body trembled as he reached out his right hand towards the array door in front of him. Countless black, snake-like, cold, fiendish energies surged out of his right hand. In this instant, the right side of his body almost lost all feeling. Yet he knew that Ding Ning was right. What he needed to do now was to be fast. The black, cold, and fiendish air current spread out in the air. However, countless white lights shot out from it, as if an ink landscape had been spread out in the air. The golden light beam landed on the ink landscape, but it only dyed the ink landscape a reddish-gold color. However, it was unable to penetrate through. Forefather Zhou howled like a wounded beast. His almost unconscious right hand swept through the air. Following a few soft sizzling noises, several white sword energies pierced into the formation in front of them, sticking close to the ground. Pieces of grass flew up. They did not follow the path of the sword energies, but were blown away by the strong winds. At this time, the right side of Forefather Zhou's body had lost all feeling, just like his lower limbs. Go! With a shout, a black wind carried him, Ding Ning, and Fu Su into the array door in front of them. The grasses and trees in the array door moved slightly. Crackling sounds sounded in the air, but there was not much tangible power left. I was wondering who that was. So it is the master of the Zhou family ink garden in Chongling. I had not expected him to be the fated person who discovered this forbidden land. The king of Chu looked with a hint of disdain at the black and white painting in the sky, and said slowly, "At this time, the clouds above him had parted. The strange spirit beast that looked like a fish and a bird had flown down. Emo Shoching and Pan Rui, seeing the old man and the beauty in palace attire on the back of the spirit beast, the king of Chu's dim eyes showed a hint of amusement. He seemed to find this matter very interesting and amusing. Chongling does not have city walls, but Emo Shoching, you are the best at guarding the city. You have always been thought of as the invisible city wall outside Chongling. And you, the master of Endless Palace, Zhang Xiu's most trusted subordinate. The two of you did not stay in Chongling, but secretly followed forefather Zhou and the two youths. What does this mean?" He examined the old man who was as old as him and the cold beauty in palace attire on the back of the spirit beast. From the emotions in the beauty's eyes, he guessed what had happened. Emo Shoching, the teacher of the Holy Son of Heaven, who very few people in Chongling knew his true name, took a deep breath. He looked coolly at the king of Chu and said slowly without disguising, "How can I hide it from you? One of the two youths is Fu Su." So forefather Zhou did not know and took the two youths to use them. You followed, but did not expect there to be such a forbidden land here, and did not expect to encounter me here. The king of Chu's gaze grew faint, and only the light of wisdom flashed in his dim eyes. "This really is an accident." Emo Shoching grimaced. "Even I, the Holy One, feared that the time and place of the Deer Mountain Conference would contain such an opportunity as yours." The king of Chu smiled and said, "Fu Su will be a very good emperor in the future because an extremely powerful dynasty will no longer need an emperor who can expand its territory, but an emperor who can protect what he has. You stopped me and watched him die like this. Is it worth it?" Emo Shoching glanced at him and said calmly, "Since I chose to do this, I naturally believe it is worth it. You are certain that the Yuanwu Emperor and Zhang Xiu will feel it is worth it. They will pay any price to obtain the greatest benefits at the Deer Mountain Conference, even if they have to sacrifice their own sons." The king of Chu smiled emotionally. "Just like how I sacrificed those who fought with them and were extremely loyal to them in the past, I am not as heartless as the Yuanwu Emperor and Zheng Xiu because I cannot be as heartless as them. Emperors are already beyond the scope of ordinary people." Emo Shoching's expression did not change as he said coolly, "Actions cannot be measured by the emotions of ordinary people. You were once the principal of multiple schools in Chongling. In terms of knowledge and reasoning, I am not as good as you, so I will not argue with you." The king of Chu looked disdainfully at Emo Shoching and the silent beauty in palace attire. With an indescribable presence, he said, "I only know that even if the two of you work together, you cannot keep me here, and I cannot kill the two of you, so I do not want to fight you." Emo Shoching nodded and said, "This is a meaningless waste of energy. Naturally, you will not let me in, since you chose the Deer Mountain Conference, and now I will not let you in." The king of Chu looked calmly at Emo Shoching and the beauty in palace attire and said, "I have waited for decades for what is inside. I naturally want to see the final result." Emo Shoching looked at him and said calmly, "Then we will wait here and see the final result." The beauty in palace attire knew that if they truly fought, she, Emo Shoching, and the king of Chu would all be wounded. Maybe they would all be killed by forefather Zhou when he came out. Not just the king of Chu, even she and Emo Shoching had a reason to not die here. So staying here was the best choice. But she and Fu Su were usually very close. When she thought of Fu Su dying inside, she could not control her emotions. She shouted harshly at the king of Chu, "What is inside?" The king of Chu smiled slightly and stood with his hands behind his back. He did not answer. We choose the present, and he chooses the future. In reality, we have a slight advantage. Mo Shoching looked at the beauty in palace attire, who was even more furious, and said softly, "He cannot do anything, but we can gamble with the future. We can gamble if a miracle will appear, and if that wine shop youth and Prince Fu Su can come out." "Is there such a possibility?" The beauty in palace attire said angrily, her chest rising and falling violently. "A slight possibility is also a possibility." Mo Shoching looked at her and said gently, "Also, if you cannot help but attack first, I cannot guarantee what will happen. We may all die here. I am almost certain that his cultivation method is related to women." Chapter 189. The beauty in palace robes took a deep breath. She looked silently in the direction that Forefather Zhou, Ding Ning, and Fu Su had disappeared. Before this, she had thought that the Yuanwu emperor and empress had made the right choice for the Qin dynasty. In order to create an unprecedented empire, they had to be ruthless and make sacrifices at many times. These ruthlessness and sacrifices were for the Qin dynasty to become stronger, for the people of the Qin dynasty to become richer. Yet today, in order to stop the king of Chu, she had to sacrifice Fu Su. When it was her turn to give up on one of her closest people, her belief wavered slightly. Ding Ning and Fu Su were pushed through the formation door by Forefather Zhou's power. The power inside the formation door had weakened to an extreme, but for Ding Ning and Fu Su, it was still very powerful. Countless chaotic branches filled Ding Ning's sea of consciousness. Ding Ning felt indescribably irritated, and his blood and energy flowed in reverse. Yet, a thread of unknown coldness and murderousness silently appeared between Ding Ning's brows. Driven by his consciousness, the countless little silkworms that had disappeared from his body silently reappeared and began to devour the cold energy that was blocking his meridians. As the little silkworms consumed, his blocked meridians quickly loosened, but he still kept all of his vital energy in his energy sea so that his presence did not change. Forefather Zhou did not know that the king of Chu and the imperial tutor of the Qin dynasty had reached an agreement not to attack each other. He only knew he had to be quick. Half of his meridians were completely frozen. In a few moments, the chaotic power around him, Ding Ning and Fu Su quickly faded, and their vision cleared. They had passed through the formation door. What he should worry about the most right now was his own safety. As the most important imperial son of the Yuanwu emperor and empress, Fu Su naturally knew that the Qin dynasty had invested in him something that countless cultivators dreamed of. He knew what the consequences would be if he died here. Yet, after passing through the formation door and seeing the scenery in front of him, Fu Su temporarily forgot about his own safety. His attention was completely attracted by the setup of the ancient cultivators. The valley that appeared in front of him was like a dry river valley. There were no weeds or trees, only oval-shaped crystals that looked like pebbles. These crystals were like deep red rubies. They were slightly transparent, and they were flowing with hot air. There seemed to be golden flames burning inside. From the outside, the clouds that seemed to cover the entire valley had been pushed aside and floated dozens of feet above the ground. At the center of the dry river valley, there was an enormous building made from blue mountain stone. This building was extremely square and slowly shrank upwards. It was like a huge mausoleum, except that there were curved arches around the bottom and upwards every 10 meters or so. Verdant green trees and vines grew out of these arches, bringing with them an aura of vicissitudes and age. It gave people the feeling that this was a garden built by the royal family. But even if it was a garden built by the imperial family, such a sturdy building could not just be used to surround the rare flowers and trees inside. What is inside? Fusu took a deep breath. He turned to look at forefather Zhou, a hint of murderousness appearing on his usually benevolent face. No matter how you look at it, this is not a building to prevent cultivators from entering, but to trap the things inside. What other beasts are inside? And what do you want to use us for? There was only one step left. Forefather Zhou fell to the ground, unable to sit still. But his face was flushed with excitement and anticipation. Since it is the last moment, there is no meaning in hiding it from you. He looked at Ding Ning and Fu Su. When he spoke, only half of his face could move, so he looked unspeakably vicious and strange. There is a flesh Bodhi inside, and a blind dragon trapped inside. Flesh Bodhi? Blind dragon? Hearing these words, even Ding Ning was shocked. There is a flesh Bodhi and a blind dragon inside. He couldn't help but take a deep breath and murmur to himself, "What is a flesh Bodhi and a blind dragon?" Fusu looked at him and couldn't help but ask. He had never heard of these two names before. They are both monstrous things. Ding Ning looked at him and explained with an odd expression. When some powerful cultivators die, the vital energy and primal energies of the universe accumulated in their bodies will not dissipate. Some of them will form a strange combination with the surrounding objects. The flesh Bodhi is one of the legends. When special plants and the corpses of powerful cultivators combine, they become a spirit body that is neither grass nor wood nor flesh. The effects of this kind of spirit body were first discovered by the cultivators of the Qi dynasty. Those grandmasters who cultivated Yin spirits and ghosts found that if they refined this kind of spirit body, it would cause their bodies to undergo a strange change and turn their bodies into a kind of spirit body that would not age easily. A kind of spirit body that does not age easily? Fu Su was slightly puzzled. Ding Ning said calmly, "The simplest analogy is a zombie. A spirit body that will not die even if a part of its body is seriously injured, unless its body is torn apart or its head is cut off. But at the same time, this kind of spirit body recovers extremely slowly. So even if you have a few holes in your body, these holes will stay for a long time." Fu Su finally understood why the king of Chu and forefather Zhou had come here. The king of Chu and forefather Zhou were truly in their twilight years, but they had powerful cultivation, especially the king of Chu. If his body turned into a spirit body like this, he would be able to fight against stronger opponents at the Deer Mountain Conference. The king of Chu was not an ordinary cultivator. Even if his body became a spirit body like this, his cultivation could not advance greatly. For him, time and the victory of the Deer Mountain Conference were everything. The blind dragon is not a true dragon, just a kind of giant worm that travels underground. While it has eyes, its eyes cannot see and can only sense. But at the same time, it is very powerful, comparable to a realm 7. So the cultivators in the past called it a dragon. Ding Ning looked at Fu Su and said, 30 years ago, even if the flesh Bodhi had not matured, forefather Zhou, who came in after being injured, was not a match for it, much less when the flesh Bodhi was mature. But now, even if the king of Chu did not appear, he would have to pay a great price to kill it. So from the start, he just wanted me to lure this blind dragon away, so he could take the chance to take the flesh Bodhi. You have indeed read a lot of books. Hearing Ding Ning speak, as though he did not exist, forefather Zhou sneered and said, "But this will not change the result." Fu Su shook his head and said, "You cannot do this." Ding Ning immediately frowned. He knew what Fu Su wanted to do, but he did not think it would be effective. Fu Su's words were ordinary, but unlike his usual words, there was an indescribable majesty and nobility in them. Even forefather Zhou felt the abnormality. His gaze landed on Fu Su. "I order you not to do this." Fusu looked at him coldly and said slowly, "Because I am not an ordinary Gongzi Su, I am Imperial Son Fusu." Forefather Zhou's heart sank. He suddenly understood why existences like Emo Shouqing would appear here at the same time. "So you are the most favored imperial son of the Yuanwu Emperor and the Empress Fusu." An indescribable emotion filled Forefather Zhou's heart. He inexplicably snarled, "You order me to do this?" Fusu had the air of royalty. He looked authoritatively at Forefather Zhou and said, "Does the Zhou family not want to establish themselves in Chongling? The Zhou family is me. I am the Zhou family. Without me, can the Zhou family establish themselves in Chongling?" Forefather Zhou said disdainfully, "Child, this matter concerns my life. I need to use this wine shop youth's life to exchange for mine. You think I will listen to your orders? Also, I know now that I do not need to be in a hurry." Forefather Zhou's body was almost unable to move, but a slow presence pushed his body to turn around. He looked at the valley behind him and said with some sympathy and even more disdain, "Child, you are also someone who has been abandoned." "You." Fusu's face paled. He was furious, but did not know what to say. He instinctively shouted, "You dare? Since I know your true identity, I cannot spare you," Forefather Zhou said seriously. Forefather Zhou said seriously, "Today, I harmed your good friend's life. If I let you live, you will not spare me in the future. However, I will not kill you quickly. I can use you to put on a show so that Emperor Yuanwu and that woman Zheng Xiu will not act." Fusu had not expected such a result. He turned to look at Ding Ning with a pale face. Sorrow and guilt appeared in his eyes. "While it is a pity, he is more important than you right now." Forefather Zhou looked at the silent Ding Ning and slowly said, "But if you can prove you are more valuable than him, I will let you live." Ding Ning raised his head, looked at him, and said, "You are dreaming." Forefather Zhou's gaze turned harsh. He did not say anything else. A black wind blew from under his robes and flung Ding Ning's body towards an arched door in front of him. Chapter 190. The power released by Forefather Zhou was not strong, but the moment Ding Ning's body passed through the stone building, an even stronger power pressed on his body, causing his bones to creak as though they were about to break. Ding Ning's mouth dripped with blood again. He knew that this came from the power of the stone building's formation. Since Forefather Zhou had come once, he naturally had some understanding of this formation. Forefather Zhou also needed him to lure away the blind dragon, so he would not let him die so easily. So he was not shocked. With a muffled grunt, the countless little silkworms hidden in his body suddenly surged and furiously swallowed the cold, fiendish energy that Forefather Zhou had sent into his body. Soft sounds came from inside and outside his body, so fine it was frightening. But at this time, his body had been thrown into the depths of the green building. Forefather Zhou, who was outside, could not detect it. There was a loud bang. His body fell heavily into the withered yellow leaves, splashing up the rotting leaves and dust that had been there for many years. The rotting leaves were dry and decayed, like they had been weathered. There was no moisture. All kinds of unknown trees and vines grew densely in the surroundings, filling the green building. Through the gaps between the branches, one could see many complicated runes on the inner walls of the green building. They were glowing faintly, naturally giving off a sense of holiness. There were some strange stone figures standing in the crowded forest. They had no facial features, but they emitted a strange killing intent. Knowing that the blind dragon would soon arrive, Ding Ning, who had landed in a corner of the green building, did not even adjust his landing posture. His body was like a half-pulled radish, lying strangely on the ground. But the little silkworms in his body swallowed even faster. Life and death were only a few minutes away. Under the frenzied swallowing of the countless invisible little silkworms, the cold energy that had blocked his meridians like black sand was completely dissolved. At this time, countless straight lines appeared in the withered leaves in front of him and rapidly extended towards his body. When these straight lines were still several meters away from him, a terrifying pressure had already pressed down on his body. Puff, 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 puff. Countless straight tears instantly appeared on his clothes. Countless straight lines of blood also appeared on the skin under his clothes. In the next moment, his body seemed to split into countless pieces along these lines of blood. With Ding Ning's present cultivation, he could not match this kind of power, but his expression was still extremely calm. The countless little silkworms in his body disappeared at an unimaginable speed. The moment these little silkworms disappeared, his breathing and heartbeat completely stopped. Like spitting out silk, these little silkworms slowly spat out some energy that seeped out of his skin. His body was covered in pale white color. Then the threads of pale white energy started to gather into a flow that flowed on the ground in front of him. The pale white energy twisted and turned into the shape of multiple small swords that penetrated into the ground in front of him, leaving behind crisscrossing marks. Ding Ning's body recovered at this time. The energy and blood in his body surged. He took a deep breath, and an ear-piercing sound appeared in the air. In this moment, the blind dragon that had been far away sensed the presence here. A gust of wind suddenly formed between the silent vines. Countless branches and leaves collided and gave off terrifying sounds. A tyrannical aura that was as vast as a mountain was traversing through it. The black had once again appeared in Ding Ning's sight. Blood started to flow from the wound on Ding Ning's chest. He narrowed his eyes and saw the blind dragon clearly this time. Behind the enormous black head was a round body, like a worm. Yet this body was extremely thin, like skin wrapped around bones. Waves of energy surged out from under the blind dragon, like invisible swords moving through the ground. Unlike last time, the power it displayed this time was even more terrifying. Waves of dust sprayed up from the ground. Just the power contained in the waves of dust was something Ding Ning could not resist. Yet Ding Ning's eyes showed a hint of unprecedented majesty. "I want to talk with you." He raised his head, looked at the blind dragon, and spoke calmly and authoritatively. At the same time, he gripped the last flower remnant sword and swung it towards the ground in front of him. A sword light landed. This sword light was extremely weak to the blind dragon. However, the sword mark left behind by this sword light was perfectly connected with the previous sword marks. A unique aura flowed out from these sword marks. It didn't have any substantial power, just a very faint aura. Yet this presence seemed to be evenly distributed in the surrounding world, permeating into the primal energies of the universe in the surroundings, even into this strange indigo building, and even into its body. A tremor rose from its body and quickly spread through its entire body. Its advancing body and power stopped, and then the entire space started to tremble. It felt even more puzzled, and then terror. That presence surpassed its cultivation. It had only sensed such a presence from the cultivator who had created this building to trap it. "I can let you out." Looking at the blind dragon that had stopped, Ding Ning knew he had won the gamble. He took a deep breath, looked at it with even more authority and coldness, and said slowly. Then he did not even look at this powerful and terrifying beast, turning to look at the indigo palace wall on the side. Destruction is always much easier than construction. He seemed to be talking to himself, but also to the blind dragon. He spoke slowly and swung the last flower remnant sword in his hand again. Several streaks of weak sword energy shot out from the tip of the damaged sword, stabbing into the frozen air. But in the next moment, it seemed to disturb countless invisible lines. Several streaks of green lightning visible to the naked eye surged in front of him. With a boom, multiple thigh-thick indigo lightning bolts spread out from the tip of his sword and landed on the seal scripts on the inner walls of the indigo building. The indigo building did not shake at all, but the ground inside, under the fallen leaves, gave off fine gusts of wind. The enormous blind dragon retreated dozens of feet. Its body started to tremble violently, but all of the power it had released quickly shrank towards its body. "It seems we can have a good talk." Ding Ning took a deep breath, looked at its body, and said slowly, Chapter 191. This was Realm 3 vital energy power. But the sword marks in front of him slowly released a concept that even Realm 7 cultivators might not be able to understand. For cultivators, when encountering such a situation, they would ponder how such a thing could happen, what kind of background Ding Ning had, and what secrets he was hiding. But for the blind dragon that had been trapped here for so many years, it only sensed the presence itself. While it could not speak, it possessed great intelligence. When Ding Ning's sword energy disturbed the formations in the indigo building and stirred up the familiar indigo lightning, it started to understand that it might be able to escape this prison. Thinking that it might be able to escape this prison, its body trembled even more violently, and its stomach growled like thunder. It was growling because it was very hungry. It was a carnivorous spiritual beast, surviving by devouring blood and qi. However, the powerful cultivators who had trapped it in the past knew of its ability to endure hunger, so they did not provide it with enough food. Over the years, its food had only been the insects that grew in the green building, as well as some birds and beasts that accidentally trespassed into the green palace. Although it could barely survive, the hunger of so many years was the greatest torture, let alone the fact that it did not have freedom. It looked at the blue sky outside, but could not come out. The king of Chu and forefather Zhou had waited for decades, but they had not waited as long as it. So many years of waiting in exchange for today's possibility. Looking at Ding Ning's calm and authoritative posture, it trembled all over. Then it lay down on the ground, and even its head was pressed to the ground. This was a sign of its obedience. Seeing the blindness above its head turn to obedience, terror, and pleading, and hearing the thunderous growls from its stomach, Ding Ning's eyes flashed with a hint of sympathy. The blind dragon's perception was many times stronger than ordinary cultivators. At this time, it even sensed Ding Ning's sympathy. It immediately lowered its body as though it wanted to sink into the thick, rotten leaves below. "I do sympathize with your situation right now. I will let you out, but you will first have to help me save my friends." Ding Ning looked at it and said these words. Then he said simply, "Flesh Bodhi." The blind dragon could not completely understand the meaning of his previous words, but it had heard the words Flesh Bodhi many times. In the next moment, its head started to sway in terror. Ding Ning frowned. He started to make some simple gestures as he spoke. "You mean to say the Flesh Bodhi also has a powerful formation that prevents you from approaching?" The blind dragon understood and started to nod. Ding Ning took a deep breath. He completely understood Forefather Zhou's intentions. Forefather Zhou only wanted to use him to distract the blind dragon for a moment, as long as he could enter the formation protecting the Flesh Bodhi, and as long as the blind dragon could not stop him before he entered the formation, he could smoothly obtain the Flesh Bodhi. Therefore, Forefather Zhou would refine the Flesh Bodhi inside. If he refined the Flesh Bodhi inside when he encountered this blind dragon when he left, even if he suffered some losses, he would not die here and could escape. "Take me there." Ding Ning looked at the blind dragon and said in a tone that brooked no refusal, "I will think of a way to break the formation." The blind dragon looked up slightly. It was slightly doubtful. Ding Ning frowned slightly. He knew what he needed to do now. So he slowly exhaled and released the countless invisible little silkworms hidden in his body. The invisible little silkworms covered his body and started to consume the primal energies of the universe in the surroundings and any kind of primal energies of the universe. Rustling sounds appeared in the air. In the blind dragon's mind, it was a completely different scene. It seemed to see an enormous being at the top of the food chain, an enormous being that could consume anything. This kind of presence was the same as the state shown by the sword marks, enough to make it tremble. It no longer hesitated and turned around. Its enormous body quickly moved through the dense forest and immediately opened a circular path in front of Ding Ning. Ding Ning followed closely behind. After a few dozen breaths, the blind dragon stopped. The trees and vines in front of the blind dragon were no different from the rest of the green building, but there was a clear green line in front of it. Among the withered leaves, there were many green crystals peeking out. The green flames emitted by these green crystals merged into one, like a wave of blue waves. Ding Ning's brow furrowed deeply again. He closed his eyes. Countless invisible little silkworms surged out of his body and slowly released the primal energies of the universe they had consumed. This kind of presence terrified the blind dragon, and it crouched on the ground again. As the invisible threads spat out by the little silkworms spread through the air, some clear lines appeared in Ding Ning's mind. Cold winds howled, and snow and frost danced in the air appeared in his mind. In such a frosty picture, countless green crystal dust was spreading, as if countless ghosts and ghosts were waiting for fresh flesh and blood to be served. Starting now, we must trust each other. Ding Ning opened his eyes and said calmly and seriously to the blind dragon. Then he reached out, like he was touching a friend, and put his hand on the blind dragon's head. The blind dragon's body stiffened slightly. Terrifying energy rose around its body. The air crackled, and energy rushed up from the ground. But Ding Ning's hand did not hesitate or shrink back, and still landed on it. The moment his hand made contact with the blind dragon's body, the terrifying energy disappeared. The blind dragon's body was still stiff, but the black, gem-like eyes flashed with even more strange flames. I will definitely let you leave this cage. Ding Ning pulled back his hand and then solemnly repeated. Then he said, I want to break this formation, but I do not have enough power. I need you to trust me and use some of your power to help me break this formation. The blind dragon still looked stiffly at him as though it did not understand. Ding Ning glanced at it and then swung his sword. The last flower remnant sword in his hand left behind a sword mark on the ground next to him. Then a wave of vital energy shot out of his left hand and entered the sword mark. Then he pointed at the sword mark and said to the blind dragon, Me. Then he sent another wave of vital energy into the sword mark and said, You. The blind dragon froze for many breaths. Suddenly, its body moved. It nodded. A beautiful smile appeared on Ding Ning's face. But he was still not in a hurry to act. He used the remnant sword to draw two figures on the ground. One was Forefather Zhou's figure. The other was Fu Su's. Enemy. He pointed at Forefather Zhou's figure and said, Friend. Then he pointed at Fu Su's figure and said, The blind dragon hesitated for a moment. Then it understood his meaning and nodded. Ding Ning looked up, but then he seemed to think of something. He bent down and drew a round figure on the ground. This was the outline of the blind dragon. Then he pointed at this figure and said to the blind dragon, Friend. These two simple words contained endless information for the blind dragon. A strange sound came from its body, and the light in its blind eyes kept flashing. It was trying its best to sense. Ding Ning looked calmly at it. It seemed to be infected by Ding Ning's calmness, and the presence around it calmed down. Ding Ning did not say anything else. He took several steps forward and stood in front of it in front of the green lines. This action caused the blind dragon's body to tremble again. It involuntarily nodded. Ding Ning swung his sword at this time. The last flower remnant sword in his hand split apart like a flower blooming. Countless sword energies shot out with the sword threads, creating countless fine paths in the air in front of him. Boom! The calm air in front of him suddenly surged with an astonishing chill. A blizzard seemed to be forming, annihilating everything. At this time, the blind dragon suddenly lifted its body. Many fleshy tentacles on its head began to flutter in the air. Waves of yellowish air rose from the ground under its body and surged into those fine lines. Boom! An enormous roar, like two enormous ships colliding, came from the space ahead. Crack, crack, crack. Countless cracks appeared on the green crystals in front of it, and Ding Ning. Then the green crystals shattered, and the layers of light quickly faded. At this time, deep in the forest, at the center of the formation formed by the green crystals, there was a tall Bodhi tree. This Bodhi tree's branches and leaves were all a strange purple. A human-shaped purple fruit hung from its roots. This fruit was like a curled-up infant, its surface giving off a jade-like and fleshy light. At this time, Forefather Zhou was sitting next to this fruit. The fingers of his left hand, the only thing he could move, were stabbed into this fruit. Waves of vital energy were absorbing the essence of this fruit and entering his body. His expression was greedy and overjoyed. At the side, Fu Su, who had been frozen among the withered leaves, looked at the expression on Forefather Zhou's face with great disgust. It was also at this moment that, along with a terrifying rumble, a shocking wave of air mixed with biting cold chi surged over. All the leaves on the Bodhi tree fell. Forefather Zhou's white hair flew in the wind. He shouted in disbelief, "What is happening?" You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.